Let's start with a big question, provocative question, an important question. Is Barbados the birthplace of rum?
So it's a question of what you were specifically claiming, and I think this gets lost in the discussion. History gets reduced to like it's a race, like who did it first. And history is about consequences, and it's about important events. And I think, as we were discussing on Monday, there's this, it's a cultural phenomenon of distilling, making, and drinking rum. When did that cultural phenomenon originate? That originated in Barbados in the 17th century. When you go under a rock somewhere and find some anecdotal, ambiguous reference to some kind of alcoholic sugarcane spirit, that's interesting, but it's not consequential. You can't find your successive steps from that to where we are, and that's what matters. Professor Drayton gave a great analog. When we say, the UK invented football, we don't mean that's the first time somebody kicked a ball, but it's the events that took place are consequential. Or the one I give is every now and again something will pop up on the internet about who came to the New World first, as if somehow we're going to rip the history books up if we discover somebody was first before Columbus. It's not about who was first.
Columbus was the consequential one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Barbados's place doesn't change, or it doesn't diminish because we find some record. And as they say, and then the other part of that too is this modern idea that if I find sugarcane and an alcoholic beverage, I'm going to call it rum. We don't understand that this forward definition that rum is defined from sugarcane is relatively modern. And it also underappreciates how sophisticated rum making was. And so this idea that once you find some kind of alcoholic beverage and a link to sugarcane, you'll find early rum is ridiculous. Because if you look at the sophistication of rum making in the from mid to late 17th century right through, you're talking about a very sophisticated beverage being made on a very large scale, and for which we have the copious records. So again, it's one thing to say, oh, I found a reference, but in Barbados we don't merely have a reference. We have a reference, we have multiple references in names, we have the references to equipment, we have references to the distillers, we have references to the shipments. And so this is why it's an unfortunate argument, but it becomes from this sort of modern idea that history is interested about, who came first or something like that, when we're really interested about consequential events.
Yeah, I mean, you said the other day, the first instance of something is not the same as a cultural shift or significance.
Yes.
And you say there are quite a few examples of distillation of cane going way back. You can sort of take it, down to Brazil. You can go over to
well, some of the reference to distillation are ambiguous. So we have good references to an alcoholic beverage in sugarcane, but we know that there was fermented. There was names for it. We know that there was fermented sugarcane juice wine. The question of distillation, and then the question of how we drink the was it drunk as a social beverage, or was it,
and the people making it as well. I mean, the Caribbean is a unique kind of melting pot of cultures, and rum is synonymous with that. If you taste that and transplant it to another part of the world, it's different people with different taste sensibilities.
Correct.
And probably
and that's
different
why
technology and methods as well.
that's one of the things I like to emphasize in my origin seminars. It's really serendipitous in terms of timing, but it's this amalgam of people, and sort of long forgotten today is the myriad of fermented beverages that were on the island. And that's influenced both from the Native Americans who were taken from Ghana and brought to the island, and of course West Africans brought to the island. And so you had this, before we distilled the first drop of juice, you had a already had a significant alcohol making and drinking culture.
Yeah. So 1631, Henry Colt wrote that Barbados were devourers up of hot waters and such good distillers thereof. What do you make of that?
So that's one of these references that's very hard to place. It's out of place. We don't have the other links. We're not clear he's speaking about rum. But it does suggest that there was also some distillation knowledge. We know there's a myriad of fermented beverages, and that's the one, but it can't be that commonplace, although he's saying there's such good distillers. That's a suggestion there's more than one.
And also
but
it's a
it's-
gradient of quality as well, right?
It's very hard to, as I say, position. And that's why I personally don't use that quote a lot. It's not part of the explanation I try to give, because I cannot definitively say what it's about. So I don't want to you'll never hear me make a claim that there's a reference to rum in 1631. I take my earliest reference to 1647.
So let's talk about 1647 then. What happened then?
So then that's Ligon. So we are very fortunate. We have Ligon document. And of course, sometimes that's history, is if we're fortunate enough to have it documented. We have to have the evidence. Without the evidence, we don't know. But so the brilliant part about Ligon is we have it so well documented, and the extent in which Ligon is, because he's talking about every plantation having a still house. And then the striking thing about...
Who was Ligon? Let's just paint the picture of that.
Oh my goodness, you're putting me on the spot with that one. So he traveled to the island around 1647, and he eventually published back in... I can't remember all the details.
I think he went to jail briefly, didn't he? He was...
I'm not a Ligon expert.
But it was a true...
We learned about him from, O-level days.
Yeah.
School.
The book is a true and exact history of the island of Barbados. That was published 1657, but he writes about...
Things take a little while to get published in those days and written and everything. But his visit. And as I say, there's a couple striking things we learn. We learned, for example, that sugar is newly practiced, but it's extremely widespread. So it's very rapid. We learned they're doing double distillation, which again is a suggestion that this technology is brought. This is not something that slowly evolved. So again, that suggests the influence of the Dutch. He really gives us a great insight. He tells us that the rum moves down into Bridgetown. He tells us that it goes on to ships.
Yeah.
So he gives us this insight as to the scale of the industry, and why rum then becomes this common identifier, this beverage that's traded. And then, of course, we have the corresponding links in the New World. We have the references to rum in New England, and so it all sort of fits together.
One of the key quotes from that book is, at the time we landed on the island, which was in the beginnings of September 1647, we were informed, partly by those planters we found there, and partly by our own observation, that the great works of sugar making was but newly practiced by the inhabitants there. Some of the most industrious men having gotten plants from... I always struggle to pronounce this. Pernambuco, is it?
Yeah,
Pernambuco, a place.
I'll just call it Recife. That's it.
A place in Brazil, and made trial of them at Barbados. So let's just double click on that. How did the transition from Brazil to Barbados?
So the Dutch were there, but they were being forced back out by the Portuguese, and effectively they did bring Portuguese sugar technology. And again, this is also where the serendipity comes in, because they bring the newest technology. We had just moved to the triple roller mill from the double roller mill, and the successive boiling. So Barbados starts in sugar. Sugar's been around for 100 years in South America, but Barbados, the Dutch bring it just at the right time, and big strides are moving. And then Barbados has this enormous resource. I mean, how lucky is the Dutch bringing it? What do the Dutch know a lot about? Wind. And what does Barbados have? Enormous quantities of wind. So, it's quite sort of fascinating to see how this all comes together.
So Barbados had wind to power the mills for the sugar and the water. as well.
So we're different from the other volcanic islands. We're limestone. We have enormous amounts of water, relatively shallow, 30 meters. So it's very easy to dig and get this water up.
And you can grow sugarcane here.
And you can grow sugarcane. Yeah. So there are references to trials before Ligon and sugarcane, but they know and they bring the and
so there were small scale.
Yes, there definitely was some evidence. There's some references to growing their sugarcane, but James Drax is the one. Drax Hall. He brings the mill from Brazil, and he's the one that takes it up to.
What was happening in Barbados before this?
Cotton and tobacco. And the cotton, of course, we actually very good with cotton, but I think at the time my understanding is that cotton prices were very depressed, and apparently our tobacco was terrible. I don't really understand why, but apparently ours was just horrendous.
Maybe it's all that wind and good water.
Yeah. So that was a failure. So the Dutch being forced out was this sort of perfect opportunity, to get into sugar.
So the Dutch would have approached the existing planters here and said, look, you need to get in the sugar game, guys. This is going to work well for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Ligon, they go to Pernambuco.
And what was in it for the
which
Dutch?
Is not quite like the trade.
Trade.
So they don't want to lose this trade. They're the great, trading nation. And they are also providers of capital. So there's business for them.
Do you I think there's a reference to a Dutch man called Peter Blower.
Yes.
1637.
Yes,
and
that's why I said there's early references to sugarcane, but it doesn't.
He brought distillation equipment, I think,
could be, yes, because again we assume that the knowledge of distillation came from the Dutch.
Yeah. Okay.
We assume that they would have brought the sugarcane knowledge as well, but probably that was originally they probably got it from the Portuguese, who were doing it in Brazil for a number of years.
So what would one of these sugar mills have looked like back in the mid to late 17th century? How did they operate?
So Ligon does a good job of documenting, but yeah, it's quite amazing when you think of how complex sugar making is today. But they would have made a very basic sugar, muscovado sugar. And you can still see that being made today in certain parts of the world. So the broad structure, they had the mill house, the curing house, and the still house. And so in the boiling house is where they take it right up to basically to the sugar, put it in the clayed sugar molds. Some debate as to when exactly Barbados started claying sugar. I'm on the side that it was quite early.
So what's that process look like?
So basically that's putting it in a sugar mold, clay mold.
You reduce it down into...
Yes, so it's a muscovado sugar, so it's this sort of dirty, wet sugar with crystals, and then eventually, so in the mold it will drip, and the molasses will, basically what you're doing is you're doing what we do in a centrifuge, modern
Very
time,
slowly.
Very slowly. So what comes out is the molasses, still lots of dissolved sugar in there, and then the brown sugar is your muscovado sugar. Right at the top, it might be quite white.
Yes.
That will get
that
that will fetch the highest.
Oh, so each level will be a value.
But the more you separate, the higher price you'll get for that sugar, and of course more sugar. The better you separate. So you grind X tons of cane. How much of the top bit clean really helps you get more of the top bit and less of the bottom, the molasses.
And then I think we might have mentioned the Jamaica train already.
So what became known as the Jamaica train was already in use. We didn't call it Jamaica train, but this idea of doing the boiling in a successive steps, which improved that final production of that liquid from which the crystals will crystallize. So that step now is done in a very sophisticated piece of equipment, the vacuum pan. Unbelievable to think of people doing this in the 17th and the 18th century, where they would do this successive boiling, all very skillful. And then that last removal of the syrup to go into the molds, or they would go first. I'm not an expert on 17th century sugar making, but it would go into You would go into usually some kind of hogshead to make the kind of an initial drip,
Right.
and then into a mold. So hogshead with like holes in. Again, it's hard to know exactly what was in the 17th or what was, because obviously we get better and better documentation.
Sure.
But the thing is, until the fascinating thing about sugar is that it was more or less fundamentally unchanged, even if they did do a lot of improvements, but fundamentally what they made from sort of early 1700s right through to late 1800s would have been very similar. This kind of basic muscovado sugar. And then from the late 1900s, where you had the earliest forms of vacuum pan, we make what's known as a dark crystal sugar. And then the modern vacuum pan, we make what's known as the yellow crystal sugar, what people today call the raw sugar. So in the 50s, we used to export yellow crystal sugar, dark crystal sugar, muscovado sugar, fancy molasses, and regular molasses.
More importantly, what were they making the rum out of in the 17th century?
So they were making it, again, it's hard to find the earliest records. We do have early records. Ligon, of course, speaks about just juice. And this makes sense because the sugar is the most valuable. So it's the skimmings from the juice.
What are skimmings?
So you boil in the juice, the impurities rise to the top. That's going to interfere with your sugar. You're going to skim them off, but you're naturally going to take some juice. You don't want to waste that. That goes into the still. So in those early days, that separated molasses was boiled down again to sell as a lower grade sugar. So in that mid 1600s, the primary action is get everything out of sugar. But of course, as rum demand goes up, we then have molasses going into rum making. There's a very early reference over in the French islands. Rum actually jumps quite quickly to Martinique. And we have a very specific reference actually in the French islands of use of molasses. But so Ligon doesn't talk about molasses, but we know it happens. And what then happens is the early formulas, as far as we can tell, is they set up water, dunder, juice, starts going, adds molasses later. That then gets discarded, if you like, or becomes the old way. In the new way is everything from the beginning: the water, the dunder, the skimmings, and the molasses. By mid 1700s, that's the new way. So that confuses some people as well, because they see the reference to water, sugar, the skimmings, and the dunder, and they think, well, molasses is not being used at this time, and that's incorrect.
And dunder, for anyone that's not familiar with, I think most people listening or watching will be familiar with the term, but can you just describe what that is exactly?
So the dunder,
there is a bit of confusion.
Yeah, so it's the residue from distillation. It's quite acidic. Again, this is where we see this extensive understanding of fermentation. And we know there is extensive understanding and fermentation of the Native Americans.
But not the underlying microbiology, just
No.
the understanding of conditions.
Yes. And so why this doesn't surprise us that sophisticated rum making becomes a reality. Because if you don't have this knowledge, instead of making, alcoholic sugarcane juice for distillation, you're just going to make vinegar. You're just going to have a bacterial mess. But they know how to manage fermentation. And again, the quality of our water, this knowledge, this cannot be underestimated, because one place may have, 1,000 tons of sugar, but if they don't know how to turn that into, 500 liters of rum, and another place can only get 100 liters of rum out of it, well, guess which place is going to become the birthplace
Survival of the fittest
of this, social beverage. So this knowledge is very, very important to develop in this kind of viable industry.
But of course, it would have
So
been.
Dunder becomes, we also always assume it's saving of water. It's it's not like nothing is to be wasted on the plantation, but they use it in a sophisticated way. So they are managing the acidity. They are managing the balance between the natural yeast and the natural bacteria to make sure they have a sensible yield. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we're in a time where all fermentation was spontaneous.
Yes.
All of it was natural. So without the control of pitching a specific yeast, you have to control the environment instead.
Yes. And so this is critical.
Yeah.
And you also don't, there's not one method. The method changes right through the sugar crop, because that's based on the availability of molasses. It's not like today. You don't crank up the sugar factory and get molasses on day one. Molasses takes a few weeks, and nature changes, as we know, with our natural fermentation. And so they knew to adjust. They had adjusted formulas, and we have good documentation on this. Not so much, obviously, in the 1600s, very hard, but we have good documentation on this in the early 1700s. I think 1720s, or maybe I'm mixing up, but we do have a good documentation in the 1700s of these formulas right through crop, and they change.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's beautiful as well, this sort of symbiosis with agriculture and understanding the needs of that plant at that time and the byproduct or the product of that plant, and then adapting to it without really understanding exactly why these things need to be done, just that they do need to be done.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's fermentation. What was distillation like at this time? What were they using? What was the technology like?
So I imagine right through 17th, late 17th, early 18th, it's classic double distillation, it's classic stills, simple and narrow. What we do know, again, we have great documentation that there was a lot of two-way. So stills were built in London, but there was two-way from the planters. They would give their specification, they would send their drawings. So we do know that they were very involved. And of course, it's all fire at this time. And but it's simple double distillation.
Always double distillation?
Yeah, I would think so. Yes, in this period. It's only when we start getting those more sophisticated stills and modified heads that we can think about single distillation and stuff like that. 17th century, 18th century, and of course Ligon describes the double distillation. And I see no evidence or reason why that's unchanged through the 18th century.
Yeah.
I think it's really late 18th, early 19th when we're starting all of those clever guys building these modified stills.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit maybe. Who was drinking it in the late 17th, early 18th century? How much was being exported, and where was it going to?
So some work within that was David Eltis published work in the 90s, revised figures, and this is where we see these extraordinary numbers for what's being exported from Barbados, which again just ties into the origin story. When we say origin of rum, we're talking an enormous scale of production. Much, obviously, vastly bigger than certainly in the 1600s of Scotch whiskey, which is it's more or less non-existent. But even bigger than Ireland. The percentage exported versus consumed locally, that's harder to, and I've seen a range of estimates on that. But yes, it's very pervasive. I mean, we know Hans Sloane writes in 1707, rum's well called Kill Devil because it kills thousands. Why is it killing people? Because it's not, we haven't got the cultural norms of today. People are drinking it from the moment they wake up. They're drinking excessively. There's not always good alternatives, safe water.
Yeah.
And people are drinking themselves to early graves. So yeah, I mean, drinking is ridiculously excessive in this period.
The origins of Kill Devil, besides the sort of obvious, it might kill you.
So that's a good question. I mean,
Richard Drayton was
he postulated a different name. I always try to explain to people, you always see this, and you see this in advertising. you know, rum was crude and terrible until brand X fixed it, you know, and we improved it. And I try to stress I see no evidence that the rum making of Ligon's day was anything other than excellent.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because just the assumption would be these people were idiots and crude, rudimentary, primitive
They're
operations.
distilling juice. The juice is, you know, it's a simple triple roller, so it's a low extraction juice. It's probably fermented really well. We know they're clever. It's double distillation. It's copper.
It's going to be better than 90% of the rums out there today, right?
You know, but it's a common problem where we read history through the 21st century.
Yeah.
And as they say, Sloan said it was kill devil because it killed people. And, old Vixen says, it's a hot liquor. And, well, there was another quote.
Hot, hellish.
It was Ligon, I think, said hot and hellish. But of course, this is because it's an alcoholic beverage.
It's a spirit. And spirits.
Hot is this drink. And they're drinking 60 something.
Probably writing it hungover as well after having too much.
Yeah. And of course, you understand, it's easy for us to understand people drink and they get drunk and they do stupid things. But in the context of the 17th century, this is almost a sort of magic potion.
Yeah.
This is a hellish thing because people drink it and they go and do stupid things.
Yeah.
So you've got to understand the context of the why they're using these words, and we go and draw this context, this 21st century context. Oh, it must be bad rum. No, it's probably, in fact, that's the problem. It was too good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So export-wise, North America and back to the UK?
No, so Barbados really lived off the American colonies. Yes, the UK was a significant, but by far, if you added up all of the American colony, what they took, it was bigger than the UK. We backed the wrong horse because we lost the American market in the American Revolution, and Jamaica, who cultivated the UK market, continued on where we had disaster. Having said that, I mean, sort of Jamaica was that sort of proverbial sleeping giant, and once woken up, it was much later to rum than us.
But massive.
But yeah, once that monster was awoken, we couldn't remotely make that kind of scale. I mean, I think by the late 1700s, they were sort of exporting 5 million gallons of rum.
Saint-Domingue had its time in the sun as well, didn't it? As a sugar
Yes.
nation. Obviously, Haiti today, they were massive at one point too. Yes. So let's talk about that sort of bit at the end of the 18th century and early 19th century, because it was troublesome for Barbados. You had the American Revolutionary War, the French Revolutionary War, the Napoleonic Wars.
Yes, it's a little bit forgotten, and Jeff Ward was discussing this recently, the impact of the French Revolutionary War as well on interrupting rum to the American colonies. And rum American colonies switched to whiskey very quickly. Very quickly. But yes, we were already a bit reeling apparently from the hurricane of 1780. And then along comes, the Revolutionary War. And it's by 1784, it's 1776, Declaration of Independence. We get this hurricane, 1780.
I mean, French Revolutionary War was 1790s, I think.
Yeah,
and then you got the War of 1812 as well.
It's hard to understand in these days, but maybe it's changing back again in the curve.
Right, maybe.
But the Americans and the Brits were enemies,
Yeah.
And so Barbados, we lost our export market.
Sorry, that's not much, but you can have some.
No, that's fine. We were devastated. But as I say, there was a hiccup before with the hurricane, and more or less, we are very absent from export in the 19th century. There's a brief windfall about 1860s. I think we export about 100,000 gallons or something a year. Not exactly clear why that happens. I suspect it relates to interruption from Jamaica. I've been meaning to do a bit of digging, but we have that brief little windfall, and that's it. By the 1890s, we're not. We're zero in the early 1800s. Brief windfall in the middle, but by 1880s, 1890s, we're zero again.
Would the sort of sugar industry have remained relatively stable during all of that period, or did it?
Yes. So the sugar industry grew and grew and grew. And our first catastrophe was the 1880s, beet sugar crisis. We recovered from that, and it grew and grew and grew again until we peaked in about 1970. And then we had our second catastrophe, and we're still in it.
One remaining on the island, right?
One sugar factory.
Sugar factory, and that one is in.
That one was built, yeah. So Barbados, when we had that beet sugar crisis, the solution to that was centralization, which had happened already in the French Islands, which is one of the things that triggered the birth of rum agricole. So centralization comes to us late. So we literally go from 1890s, there are 400 sugar estates and there are 400 sugar works. And is just a handful doing vacuum pan sugar. Everybody's doing muscovado. And by the 1930s, there's about 20 something what we would recognize then as a central sugar factory. So the estates are sending to central sugar factories. And some of the central sugar factories are owned mostly by the feeder estates, but not every estate has shares in a factory. There's more consolidation to be bigger centrals. So by the 60s, in our peak, we were 14 sugar factories, central sugar factories, one of which is Foursquare. In 1970, a cooperative is founded, and all of the sugar factories go into one company, and everybody gets shares. So all the former factory owners get shares, and all the sugar planters who don't have shares in the factory get shares. That's formed in 1970, and we're reduced to 10 sugar factories, one of which is Foursquare. And between 1970 and now, they're all gone. Foursquare shut down in 1988 as a sugar factory. So we went through that huge crisis in so we literally have this rise, 1890s crash, rise again right through the 50s and 60s. Centralization is a massive success. If you would ask someone in Barbados in the 1950s, the health of the sugar industry, would have spoke about it in most glowing terms. And it was also the best period for those who worked in the sugar industry, because we'd had some of the worst conditions post-emancipation were in the 30s, leading to riots, leading to another Royal Commission, which didn't really get implemented till afterwards. But we started to have, for the first time, universal adult suffrage. So for the first time in the late 40s, early 50s, we're having representative government. We're getting a better deal for people in the sugar industry. So that's why today we have this kind of dual nostalgia with the sugar industry, almost conflicting. I remember Professor Drayton pointed out two sort of almost conflicting calypsos. One where it's fondly remembered, but they're really remembering this period of the 50s and 60s where people are starting to do better out of it and being able to educate their children out of it and things like that, as opposed to prior to that, where it's just, the conditions in Barbados in the 30s are some of the most abject in the entire world. So we have this wonderful rebound, and then from the 70s, this is really driven by collapsing world sugar prices, etc. And so we're now, we're in that catastrophe now. We cannot compete with making sugar anymore.
You gave a really good talk the other day about the double retort pot still, which you
enjoyed it.
Equipment that you're in love with, quite clearly. Can we talk a bit about the development of distillation technology in the 19th century, and maybe start by describing what a double retort is and how important it is to rum and to you.
So, well, let's start with a simple pot still everybody knows. In fact, I would be very careful to point out that a simple pot still has 3 elements. I think some people tend to think that, you know, it's a pot and then something else. It's a pot, it's a head, and it's a condenser. And the head can be very simple or it can be very sophisticated. Condensers historically could be worm tubs, nowadays shell and tube. So the double retort is where we marry the pot, a head, to what we call retorts, which are smaller pots, and then the condenser. So from the late 18th century, early 19th century, there's all this tremendous work to improve distillation. And the motivation is efficiency, higher proof. And one channel of that work ultimately is what gives us the continuous still. Somewhat forgotten today is the myriad of channels of modified batch distillation, not continuous still. I mean, there are lots of designs of continuous still as well. But we've forgotten all these modified. And as I discussed on Monday, they were very much adopted in rum. And as I discussed on Monday, one of my theories is that being rum was next to the sugar industry, where innovation and change were part of the culture. It lent itself that rum making, as opposed to, you know, Highland single malt whiskies or French distillers, that lent themselves better to this idea of being driven to modify. And
why do you think that was?
Because of the culture. So the distiller is also the sugar maker. So in the sugar making, he understands very much the benefits of efficiency, the benefits of making a whiter sugar. This is his culture. So it's very easy for him to approach rum making the same way. Well, why can't mine still be more efficient? Why can I make a higher proof and sell it for more money? I think this, and again, this is my theory.
Yeah.
And because I think today we forget that all rum making was next door to sugar making. Today, of course, we have this separation.
Yeah.
But certainly, you know, up to even very recently in Jamaica, every single distillery was attached to a sugar factory, and that was the norm.
So Wortley Park still is.
Yes, but the idea of having a distillery and not a sugar factory would have been very bizarre.
Yeah.
Even up to, I suspect, maybe the first time that not all of the distilleries in Jamaica were attached may have been the closure of Innswood factory. Well, I may be wrong on that. But yeah, so there's this influence. So we have in the Caribbean these modified stills. They're rife. They're everywhere. You look in and you can go and look in the old ads where people are selling estates, and it's, you know, Shearer's patent still. No, it's not a coffee still. It's a modified pot still. And you do see, as I discussed too, this great influence from this Winter's patent head. So this is one of our earliest modified heads. So not just, I know in Scotch whiskey to have some heads, you have maybe a little cooling on.
Some of them have got water that comes
Yes.
down. There's a few with
So
like pipes.
as you
that sort
saw,
of
the
fill-
Winter's patent
Yeah,
head
that's just a totally different thing altogether. Yeah,
is
It's
extraordinary.
a work of madness. But
Yes.
yes, it's.
But it influences.
I'll try and maybe I'll flash it up on the screen for anyone that's
So
watching.
it
Sure.
influences this addition of sophisticated heads. And one eventual popular design for sure is Blair's is making a still with a Winter's style head and a single retort. But they're making that up to the late 19th century. We know the double retort is already around. Ray writes about it in 1848. So I gave that a little bit of that analog with aviation. You know, if you went to the airport in 1970, and you were an aviation enthusiast,
Yeah.
you were in heaven. You saw twin jet and quad jets and different noses and a VC-10 with 4 engines at the back and a 707 with 4
So the history of
wings.
aircraft
And if you went to Barbados in the 1890s or through the Caribbean, you would have been similarly ecstatic. You would have saw retorts, single retorts, double retorts, cooling heads, heads on the pot, heads on the retort. You would have seen every myriad of some of which I tried to post on Monday. And like today, where it has got sort of the triumph of the twin jet design.
Yeah.
Double retort has triumph. I mean, it's not a perfect analog, but that's kind of the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
The double retort sort of triumphed.
Yeah. So how does a double retort actually work exactly? Because you've got sort of low wines components.
So one of the beauties of the double retort is it does get used in different ways. But the classic way, certainly the most common way, particularly if you went to Jamaica, say back in the 50s, where there were about 20 odd distilleries, is you charge the retort 1 with what we call low wines, retort 2 with high wines. You charge the pot with mash.
What are low wines and high wines?
Well, it's a circular explanation. So you start distilling away and you take 4 fractions. It's like cognac. So you take your heads, you take your rum, your heart, and then you split your tails into high wines and low wines. So if you think of classic double distillation, you make a first distillation with no cuts. You take your spirit run and you recycle your heads and tails back to the first run. Well, we recycle our tails, well, and the heads too. The heads are quite small, back to the first and second retort. In that sense, it mirrors a little bit classic Irish, well, and Scottish triple distillation, because they have a second run where they split. I know there's some different versions of triple distillation, but they also have in their context the splitting of the tails and the maintaining of that split by how it's recycled. So there's definitely some analog to Irish triple distillation. But yeah, that's it. That's it in a nutshell. But people do different things.
And the goal of it is what?
So that's the thing. It wasn't so much a goal as this is how it evolved and giving us the desired what we want. So what the double retort is so good at is delivering us high proof, delivering us the separation to select that rum and make sure that rum doesn't have what we don't want to have. And the other thing that is very, very good at is ester development.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day, and esters will be something that most people who listen to this podcast are very familiar with. We talk about it a lot. And of course, esters are synonymous with fermentation.
Yes.
But you were saying how there's ester formation during distillation as well. So let's, if you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so esters are definitely formed during fermentation. They can be formed directly from the yeast. They can be formed indirectly from bacteria. And then when we heat, we catalyze by injection of heat for more formation. And we know that heat's strictly not technically a catalyst. Heat is energy in, but copper is thought to catalyze some of this development. And by that recycling is we are basically given that push all the time. And so it's a combination of that exposure to copper and that repeated heating and exposure to copper is thought. And, you know, the typical, most ordinary pot still rum will have more copper, more esters in it than the highest ester Scotch whiskey distillate you can find.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. It's not the whole story, obviously, but it's part of it. And so I think this is one of the reasons why the double retort became king. And as I say, it looks to me that the double retort won over from the single retort and rectification head. That's not to say we don't have double retorts and rectification heads. I do. But why did the single retort lose out? Or why did we lose a lot of those rectification heads, which did exist in Jamaica? And it seems the double retort gave them exactly what they wanted.
Can you just explain the rectification head quickly as well?
Yeah, don't show that picture. So he said, so the thing to understand, so one of the, we'll get controversial. So one of the annoying terms I always hear is when someone says, well,
I would hate for this to get controversial at any point.
I have a hybrid still. No, you don't. And it comes from the fact that we use the euphemisms pot and column when the correct dichotomy is batch and continuous. And batch stills have always had some level of rectification. If you take a very simple batch still with a very simple, boring little fat neck, that's rectification. That's a plate.
Yes.
The cooling is the atmosphere. Inside there, some of the vapor, unless you run incredibly hot, some of the vapor will condense on that copper and drip back down.
Yeah.
That is rectification. Obviously, your little fat still with a very short fat neck has a very small amount of rectification.
All the Scotch whiskey people at the moment are like, he's coming for us.
No, but if that's what you want to make, that's fine. But that's low rectification. And then obviously people with sort of very long lean arms, and it's more. But you can then enhance that by literally putting contact in trays in them. To give you the flip side, a continuous still, you could make a continuous still with no trays, but it would be impossibly tall because you're trying to get liquid and vapor to mix.
Yeah.
In the tray helps you do this. And so in the lean arm, yes, you get some minimal liquid vapor mixing, but if you put some contacting trays in there and then you go one better and put some cooling. So if you looked at Winter's patent, there's all these water baths.
Yeah.
And so if you put some cooling now to force some reflux to fall and mix with your rising vapor. So you're taking the same batch distillation, it's still batch distillation, but you are enhancing that rectification from that basic. So when you have one of these pot stills and it's got a little column section where it sits on the top or on the side, it's just a modified pot still. It's not a hybrid still because it's still operating as a batch still.
Yep.
Continuous is a separate process. You haven't hybridized that separate process. You've got a modified batch still. And modified batch stills existed before the development of the continuous still.
Yeah.
So you can't go back in time and tell somebody you have a hybrid of something that didn't even exist.
Yeah. Right. Well, since we're on distillation,
so of course, people love their little cool hybrid stills, and there's nothing wrong with saying I have a modified batch still.
Yeah. But it's still a batch still.
Just sounds cooler to say I have a hybrid.
It does sound
like
cool, doesn't it? Yeah.
I'm following the middle road.
I mean, it either can do continuous distillation or it can't, right?
Yeah.
That's the
and to understand that those words also have great meaning. Continuous distillation is fundamentally different to batch distillation because of the output. So in continuous distillation, I'm feeding my mash continuously, but my output is separated physically.
Yes.
So I'm continuously taking heads, rum, tails, physically.
From different heights.
Physical separation.
Yeah. Based on volatility.
And each line is theoretically the same chemical composition. So I'm constantly making rum, I'm constantly making, or whatever, if I'm making ethanol or whatever. And it's a physical separation.
Whereas with batch
distillation now, I'm making a separation by time. My heads, my heart, my high wines, my low wines. So the difference with batch distillation is this is always changing. In continuous distillation, I'm constantly making the same exact thing, chemically speaking. In batch distillation, I'm never making the same thing. In continuous distillation, the liquid at the bottom of my still is always the same composition. in batch distillation, the liquid in my batch is constantly changing.
Mm.
So the two of them are fundamentally different. And there's no such thing as a hybrid of the two processes.
Yeah.
And you can never make the same thing from both.
Yeah, so that's my next
Because
question.
they will never align.
Yeah, that's my next question. So obviously continuous distillation is synonymous with high strength, very high strength
Because
distillation.
it can.
Because it can. But does that mean it has to?
No.
So can I make something that tastes like it's
So
come
here's
off the pot?
another thing that's a little tricky to get your head around, and I hope people won't misunderstand. So a single column still design is not very versatile. So if I go out and I tell someone I want a column still that makes neutral spirit. Well, guess what? That's what it's gonna make. And similarly, if I went out and I said I want one like a Creole column, it's gonna make. The pot still is actually more versatile within the band of what it can make.
So you've got, what you're saying is the continuous still is designed for its purpose, and that's what you're going to...
And it's more narrow within its design. Whereas I can get a pot still, and from my pot still was, I can make high ester rum and moderate ester rum, and I can make heavy, light, loads of congeners, lesser congeners. Now, can I make neutral spirit from my pot still? No. And it is not so broad. Could I design a batch still to make neutral spirit? Yes, but it would be very stupid. It could be done, but it would be the stupidest neutral spirit still ever built.
So could I commission a continuous still that makes 70% high ester rum or medium ester rum? It manages to capture what I would...
words, one of the best designs I ever saw was on paper, and it's a little bit what some of the you will hear from some of the Spanish guys, and this is quite accurate. So they'll have a multi-column still, which makes this light product, or they'll take something from the first column.
Okay.
So they are using their continuous still to make two different things. And one of the best designs I ever saw,
aguardente, as they call it. Yeah.
One of the best designs I ever saw was the common mash column, and then they went two routes. So one route was sort of a multi-column, and the other route was kind of more like a coffee still. And I thought that was great. But of course, this is very expensive. You're basically buying two stills, say, for one mash column. But yeah, the column still does what it's designed to do. There is a story, I won't tell you who, but they bought a still, and it was designed to make neutral spirit. And they thought, I'll just take it a few trays down and it'll be rum. And they were quite stunned to discover it was neutral spirit. Yeah, because the thing about rectification is it's non-linear. So, coffee still like mine is about 25 trays to do 94%. But if I wanted to do 96%, I'd probably have to have like 50, 60 trays.
It's exponential.
In other words, there's a small amount of trays to get to the 90s, and an enormous amount of trays to go from virtually double again, to go from sort of
an extra 2%.
Yes. Yeah.
And what in terms of the character of those spirits, 96 being effectively neutral and 94 being only 2% less alcohol.
So again, that's a mistake I hate people to make, because distillation is a separation process, not a purification process. So while I'm not going to tell you that there's not some correlation between distillation strength and congeners, it's a mistake to think that there's this sort of absolute relationship. So when you have a still making neutral spirit at 96%, it's not just the rectification. They will have in the hydroselection column, drive off higher alcohols. There's a massive, it's a significant difference between
Demethylator columns as well.
That was typically with beet molasses, because beet molasses has high methanol. Fortunately, cane molasses does not. So you could make neutral spirit without a demethylator. But it is it's a separation process. And the fact is, it's separation by boiling point, but not everything is perfectly cooperative. So actually, when you mention methanol, that's a great example, because even though the boiling point of methanol is lower, it's more volatile, it does not separate well in a classic. So if you have a mash with lots of methanol, lots of alcohol, it does not separate well on your rectifier, because methanol has an affinity for alcohol.
Forms an azeotrope, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's more of a interaction of the bonds, and it's buddies with alcohol, so it doesn't like to cleanly separate off in your heads, and that's why it's a pain in the ass in a lot of spirits, because things don't perfectly behave with, and that's one of the other reasons why batch and continuous will never mix or never correspond, because when you do a batch still, one of the things you're doing as you distill is you're lowering your alcohol content of your mash, and you're lowering your alcohol content of your vapor. So the individual components are going to behave differently through the process, and that's why they'll never correspond. You never mirror, and that's why, you could distill 80-something% in the column still and distill 80-something% in the pot still, and it'll taste completely different. It's, as they say, people do get confused. I do remember very innocently, someone was from the tequila world, and I think he fancied himself a bit of an expert, but he heard that, Hamden distilled to whatever, Hamden 84 or 85 or whatever Hamden distills, it's well in the 80s. And he was horrified. He was like, oh my God, they're throwing away so much flavor. And I just thought, amazing that you have two choices in front of you. Either you don't know what you're talking about, or the Jamaicans have got it wrong for 300 years. And you believe the Jamaicans have got it wrong for 300 years. But it's born of this idea that there's this strict correlation between distillation.
Yeah, you can kind of understand the thought process. You're like, well, more alcohol means less of everything else.
Yes. It's not straight.
Yeah.
What the double retort is, the way I try to explain it is the double retort, or even my coffee still, is very good at removing water.
That's it. Yeah. That's what you're trying to do at the end of the day, right? Keep the flavor, remove the...
So, yeah, I mean, if I show you GCs of Hamden, or, the conjure levels are higher than the double distilled Scotch whiskies. So how are we achieving this miracle at 80-something%?
Yeah.
Because it's not a purification process. There is not an absolute correlation between the strength in my tank at the end of distillation, because remember, it's changing the whole time of distillation.
Of course.
There's not a correlation, absolute correlation between that and the congener profile.
So you have both a coffee still and two pot stills here with double retorts. Let's talk a little bit about blending, and the different marks of rum that these produce, and why that's important to you.
So rum really kind of developed that a little bit accidentally, the idea that the distillery makes multiple marks, and it was really born out of consolidation. So a mark was the distillery's mark. So you made, you produce, you fill the barrel, and you put your stamp on it. And then as we had shrinkage in the, especially in the 20th century, famously in Jamaica, the recipe would move, and then they'd make that mark.
This is the high Ester.
Well, all of them. Loads of marks in the different categories. And so it's very normal today for a rum distillery to have the ability to make a range of products. And if you think of Worthy Park resurrects itself back in the early 2000s, immediately it makes several different marks. It sets up from day one. It makes different marks.
It
doesn't just set up and say, "Oh, I'm going to make rum again."
Yeah, this is because in the past distilleries didn't tend to bottle their own product; they'd sell it to a blender.
Correct.
Then a blenders acquire distilleries, and they need to be self-sufficient on the marks that they want to produce.
Yeah, in other words, the blender's bought by Marques, and when there was consolidation, we didn't want to lose the sale of that mark. So the mark, and then of course in Demerara, very famously, it's not the mark it's not the recipe that moves, but the whole damn still. So when we literally speak about in Demerara like Port Morant, we don't just mean the Port Morant recipe. We mean the whole physical still.
Part of the distillery. Yeah.
And so, so this sort of culture of making multiple marks. And so, of course, when we Foursquare, we sort of resurrect here. I mean, you're born with this. You're born, first of all, with a basic idea that Barbados rum is pot and column still. I mean, that's a 20th century. That's a turn. The modern Barbados rum is really created around the turn of the century. But that's it. That's the style. And so you're born with the idea you're going to make that style. So immediately you start already. And then, of course, I mean, it's natural to develop different marks and create. Because today, unlike the past where you had the independent, where the blenders are, the distillery has their own brands. So now distilleries have to be distillers and blenders. You go back in the day. I mean, it was as recent as Edwin Charley in the 1920s. Edwin Charley is the first distiller in Jamaica to say, I'm single estate brand. Very first. Because he starts his business in the 1890s. He starts aerated beverages, and I think he does some brewing. Anyhow, he gets into rum blending. And then he buys a number of estates. He amalgamates them and calls it Innswood Estate. And then in the 20s, he puts in a sugar factory and distillery. And so for the first time in Jamaica, there's a brand, it's Edwin Charley, and he can boast to the world, which he does, and say, I'm in control of everything. I grow the cane, I crush the cane, I distill the rum, I blend the rum, I bottle the rum.
What was the dates on that? Sorry?
So he builds Innswood factory about early 20s.
Early 20s.
Of course, he doesn't boast because he has to put the rum down and it has to age. So I think you see him boasting about his single estate as from the 30s, 40s.
Yeah, so it's similar timing to when the whiskey blenders started buying up distilleries a little bit later in Scotland. Yeah, which is a similar thing. But of course, in that situation, you didn't have the grain whiskey and the pot whiskey being produced in the same distillery, or at least very rarely.
No, so as I pointed out, it's one of the special things about rum that we did embrace this column still. Yes. And but we put it side by side. It was not an independent entity. So again, the distillery could make individual marks that went to the blenders.
Yeah. So when did the first continuous still arrive in Barbados? Do you know?
So that's a good question. The conventional wisdom is 1893. And I say this not to be in any way, because obviously the issues are word. I've actually done a bit of research. This was mostly on Jamaica. And I'm preempting my publication a little bit. But I've done a bit of research because I was trying to Jamaica's famously very much later to the column still. And so I was trying to pinpoint exactly when Jamaica went to the column still. And it's basically in the 50s, so I won't preempt my article too much. But it's in the 50s they go to the column still. But then I also discovered in my research that Jamaica had dabbled with the column still in the 19th century, and it failed.
For a reason did it fail?
Good question. But there is evidence, and I remember speaking with Mike Delavanti about this, and you said you're sure it's continuous because some people would have a glorified pot still and say, oh, it's continuous. No, I had definite evidence of some trials with continuous stills, and they fail. And then it's basically not talked about again for, decades later. And in this discovery, I discovered some reference to continuous distillation in Barbados.
Interesting.
But again, I'm cautioned by Mike that it may have been just a pot with a glorified preheater. So I have to dig some more.
Because you're always just working on sort of descriptions.
Yes, it's not easy. So again, to come back to my point, it's not about who was first. It's about the consequences.
That's right, yeah.
So the 1893 West Indies Rum Ferry was consequential. And they... what happened, as far as I can piece together in Barbados, we had this massive shrinkage of distilleries, which was well underway, but they were kind of the final nail in the coffin. So we have the shrinkage of industries because of the tax, they put in licensing, they're putting in regulations where a distiller can't sell his product. Because what used to happen in those days was a lot of the distillers would have to, with retail, they would have a shop, and they were prohibiting that. And so we have this massive shrinkage of distilleries all the way down. And as far as I could piece together, and again, it's related to the double retorts and the modified heads, is Barbados had 2 grades of rum, single distilled and double distilled. And when West Indies distillery came along, they wiped out the single distilled guys, because that was the cheaper stuff. The column still was sold as single distilled, it was cheaper, and it wiped those guys out. And the reason why places like Marques survived is they were doing double distilled. In fact, by the early 1900s, the only non-West Indies distillery still is doing double distilled. So there's still a Premier in Bay Street, was the Batson, he's doing double distilled. There's Carrington Factory, they're still doing double distilled. And there's Mount Gay, they're still doing double distilled. They're the only ones that survive. So by the 1900s, we're down to like 4 distilleries or whatever. But they revolutionized Barbados rum, because what happens is it's cheaper, and the blenders blend. They blend the cheaper single distilled rum with the Boston. Yes. And it's so interesting because, I can go back and I can read J.C. Nolan's evidence to the 1908 Commission, and he says, if you bring a continuous still to Jamaica, it will destroy our industry. And I grew up, the blenders before me, and I grew up as a boy, were like, you can't make rum without a pot still. They had gotten past Nolan. They were accepting of the column still, but the notion that you could make it without the pot still, not accepted.
And do you think that's really when this Barbados style was properly instituted?
And I think it was very light. It went through, and sometimes people, like I have some, I've tasted some Dories from the 50s and stuff, and some other Barbados brands, and people, they ask me about it because they assume I'm going to taste something from the 50s. It must have been absolutely fabulous. And it's like, no, it's very, very light. Because this came, and this was very, very trendy. In fact, I posted the other day some ads that ran in English newspapers. There was a rum, they were advertising it as breathless rum.
Because it's so light.
You drunk this rum, and it was not on your... Exactly.
Smirnoff did a campaign like that, didn't they, in America when they first launched? And it leaves you breathless. Yeah.
It did come from West Indies. And this was this was what was in vogue. This was in vogue for so long that when we put my twin column in the 90s, people told me, you're going to fail because you have to make it like McCarty. And I remember even in those early days, we thought, well, look, we're going to have to sell some bulk to survive. And we went offering bulk, and everyone who was buying bulk was like, you got to make it like McCarty. I was like, oh dear. My coffee still doesn't make me like that. But that was honestly, that was the trend, but definitely in the 50s. So yeah, when I tell people ask me, is today, Doherty's 5 true to the Doherty's 5 of the past? I say, no, we've evolved.
That's interesting. This is the thing. I guess it's an ever-evolving thing, right?
Right. I grew up in the era of the light rum was king.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I was young, it was Bacardi everywhere, and light rum was king. But it's so interesting. I think for a lot of people listening to this, and I've been getting it all week here at the Barbados Rum Experience, we've talked about cane juice rum in the early history of Barbados, and skimmings rum, and pot stills, and natural fermentation. And then we've gone right through distillation, innovation, double retorts and different heads, then onto the column still. And even within the blending of the 20th century, there's these trends and forces that dictate how this liquid tastes.
I think no, you weren't in that group. I got asked when did you think you'd do a cask strength rum? And I think we saw Ian Varel today, and I think, Ian ribs me because we started exporting about late 90s, and first Rum Fest was 2007. And I think when people ask me about cask strength, then I said, are you insane? And the reason is simple. 2007, people are coming up to me with some sugared rums, which we will not name, and telling me, oh, this is so smooth. Do you really think in 2007 I'm going to think the solution to the market is make it stronger?
Yeah. It's not. Yeah, it's not.
When everyone's the famous brand of the time. I mean, everybody will know what I'm talking about. Not to mention the.
Well, I'll throw some names out there. It's Marques, so I guess some of the sweeter rums you might be thinking of could be Diplomatico, could be
Not so much. Not Diplomatico at the time, but certainly and there are other ones, and oh my God, this is so. So the last thing you think about, and that's why, and I often, there was when we did the ECS, we did the 2008 first, and then I got interrupted.
This is the Exceptional Cask series.
I got interrupted. There was a few other projects that people know. There was a few other projects I did with different people. And of course, people, when they go back and they drink the 2008, it's nothing like, say, a later vintage. And I said, but what you got to understand, that was the zeitgeist of the time.
Mm.
So that rum was 40%, very sweet, natural.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Very soft, very sweet. Because that's what people wanted.
Yeah.
100% column still. Because even though I'm still defiantly making pot still rum, I'm still recognizing, hey, people want column still.
Do you like what? Tell me what you love about the coffee still and what.
So I always would joke that I always like to make sure people understood I loved my column still. So I would have an expression to take my column still away from my cold dead hands. Because the pot still gets love absolutely correctly, but I hate people to dismiss my column still as some kind of bland neutral spirit still. That's an awful thought.
I think the problem is that, of course, column still for a lot of people means vodka or it means very light rum,
and it can mean, go to Gregory,
yeah,
and see his
the Creole stills,
magnificent Saval all copper, makes the most beautiful spirit. I mean, one of the amazing things to go and visit that, which I got to when I went to his 90th anniversary, was to see what were very clever innovations when that was put in. And so I'm looking at this thing and I'm seeing parts of it and I'm thinking, they had that already? Like, wow.
Yeah, no, it's it's an amazing distillery, an amazing brand. I've been fortunate enough to visit there as well and fell in love a little bit. Yeah, It's good. As you know, as I said to you the other night over cigar, Luca thinks very highly of
Gregory's the best.
Yeah.
He's the best.
Yeah.
But he'll tell you he's a farmer, first and foremost.
I know, but there's something in that, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the best mezcal producers I know, they consider themselves agriculturalists, or plant chemists, they care about the material.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I've had conversations with eau de vie producers on this podcast, and I always think they've got an interesting angle as well, because they're really just trying to get the most out of the product. They're trying to translate that product and preserve it in liquid form.
Yes.
And
or as Lucas says, we're trying to capture the soul.
Capture the quintessence, yeah. And I think the best rum producers, the best whiskey producers, cognac or brandy and agave are doing the same thing. They care intrinsically about the product they're using and they want to get the best out of it. And all of the steps involved to get there, fermentation, distillation, etc., are just really conspiring to do exactly that.
And I mean, I would add to that, we did have a discussion. For me, it's extremely important that I have my identity. So it's extremely important that people, when they taste the rum, they go, it's Foursquare, it's Barbados.
Yeah.
So this is very, very important because, as they say, anybody can do something different. It's trite to be different.
Yeah.
What's challenging is to push the envelope of excellence, but keep your identity. Keep that people say, this is Barbados, this is Foursquare.
Do you see your identity as being static or evolving?
That's a very good question. There's no question that a big chunk of it is static. Yes. but it must be the case that it evolves a bit. It must be. It's impossible not to be. But the core elements, in other words, this idea of a Foursquare rum as being sort of very balanced and very rounded and very seductive, for me, that must never change. But it doesn't mean other elements don't get pushed. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of the changes that have happened here over the last few years a little bit later. But actually, maybe this is a good time to go back and perhaps talk a little bit about your family history and how you ended up in rum in the first place.
Yeah. No, it's good. Good. So, my great-grandfather, viewers won't see, but
Yeah, but
there's a picture of the business in
catch
Rowan
that.
Street.
Yeah.
So again, it's very similar to Scotch whiskey. You know, British colony is very similar. My great grandfather was what you would know as a wholesaler or grocer in Bridgetown. There were many of these businesses, and they traded, the commodities. Basically, the shops in Barbados, they would come into Bridgetown once a week. They'd head into Roebuck Street, where all the traders were, and you'd fill up and get all your goods and head back out to the country shops. In Bridgetown, the sort of elite businesses were the importers. We didn't sing in that choir. And then the Roebuck Street wholesalers would be how these sort of products got to market. And all Roebuck Street wholesalers bottled various products, rum being the dominant. But we all bottled Falernum, and we all bottled a few other oddball things of the era, cherry brandy, and a few other oddball
Things beside alcohol as well. Were they selling?
Not really. No, not really. It would have been the sourcing of the rum in bulk would be the basis of creating these other beverages. And and that was your first brand, but you didn't really see it as a brand. And if you look at the early labeling, I have a lovely old bottle of Dorley's there. And, it's bottled by Martin Dorley and Company. It's not Dorley's rum per se. It becomes a brand.
Sure.
And so again, it's very much like Scotland and, the Johnny Walkers and the Mr. Dewars and Mr. Ballantynes and Jamaica's the same. Mr. Fred Myers, Mr. Daniel Finzi, Mr. Edwin Charlie, they're all blenders. J. Ray, I mean, why is there a J. Ray and an Appleton? Because J. Ray is the original merchant.
Nephew, not his surname.
Yes. J. Ray and his nephew are the original merchant trader.
Yeah.
Who then ultimately acquire Appleton and etc. The estate.
And on that as well, it is interesting how surnames and family names become brands. But I guess what the purpose they served was to gain trust, right? If you're in the 19th century and you say, right, well, I want to make a rum brand called Cane, right? Well, it doesn't mean anything to anyone.
Exactly. It's about trust.
And so, but you put your family name on the bottle.
Because remember,
you're putting your family on the line.
In Roebuck Street, we're selling all effectively commodities. Rum is a commodity, but it's about the trust relationship. It's about the guy for the country shop. No, I buy my goods from Seale. I buy my goods from Dorley.
And you're putting your family's reputation on the line. That's big.
Yeah. So this is my great grandfather's business. By the time it comes along to my father, well, let me get clear. So a lot of these businesses, of course, they don't exist now. Part of that is that by the time it's my grandfather's time, sort of 50s, this is very much a middle class existence, maybe even lower middle class, running a wholesaler. And what you want better for your child. You want to use your middle class income to afford, because it's before free education. You want to get him to be a banker, a lawyer, accountant. You want better for him. So a lot of the businesses don't succeed in generational. They don't continue. And my grandfather wants the same for my father. Unfortunately, my father doesn't do that brilliantly in school. Not that he's not smart, but he's not, he's not that, like many youngsters, that maybe not that focused. But anyhow, so he's sent out into the world of work because my grandfather doesn't want him joining the business. He wants better for him. And so he's sent out in the world of work. And my father ends up working with the airlines. And eventually my grandfather doesn't want to continue the business. My grandfather was not really a business animal. He liked to go to the church and play the organ. And he was very happy. He, in one way, while he wanted his son to go out, he was also happy to retire and, you know, go into church and play the organ. So my father joins the business, but he comes from the airlines. And my father feels that this time out was very important. So I'm raised with this dual instruction. You will join the business, because my father's very proud of his success. He really builds the business up. So unlike generations before, he wants his son in the business. I'm given the name with the same initials. I shall join. He's proud of the business. He doesn't want me to become a banker or a doctor or a lawyer. He wants me to join the business. But I have to go out and work somewhere.
How did that feel, though, the expectation?
You just didn't know any different, you know? That's the thing. It wasn't like when you're a kid, you weigh these things up, you know? To be honest, you just take it, you know? And so
Did you ever want to do something else?
if I was somewhere else, I'd probably have been in academia.
You're kind of moving that way, I think, in a few ways.
Well, ironically, not necessary. History is the only non-science subject that I missed when I had to leave it behind. So there's always been a love there.
Well, I dropped history quite early in my education, and now I seem to spend a hell of a lot of time.
No, I loved history, but I went on to end up in the world of mathematics. But anyway, but the point is, so my father says I gotta go to work, and so I join. And I always tell people this is the best decision they ever made. Of all the decisions they ever made, this is one decision. What do you do? Well, I joined what was Cooper's and Ligon, the forerunner. I'm telling people how old I am.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing to understand in Barbados, this was genius. It's not like that now in today, because in those days, if you worked with an accountant, you worked in a supermarket today, you worked on a manufacturing tomorrow, you worked on an insurance company the day after that, you don't get that experience now. And that has served me the rest of my life. And it served me immediately, because when I joined my father in 93, what's happened is he's made the biggest purchase of his life. He has bought the Arthur portfolio, including Dorley's brand. It's huge. And I say to him, so he's bought this big brand. He wants to export. He wants to invest in aged rum. So I said, well, sure, we got to build a distillery. We've reached a crossroads. And I'm a kid. I joined, but it's obvious. So guess who prepares all the applications to the bank and everything like that? Who is now skilled enough?
It was meant to be. You were just training all that time for a distillery acquisition. So just before the LA and Arthur purchase, what brands were sat within the business?
ESA Field was a big brand. We had some other brands, but ESA Field was the big boy by far. And my father had bought that in the 60s.
Right.
So we have brands that we bought.
And it's still the best-selling rum in Barbados, right?
It's not the best-selling individual, but it's the big three in Barbados, which are our three, are Old Brigham, ESA Field, and Alley and Arthur.
Yeah.
So it's one of the big mega.
Yeah, I've definitely contributed to the Old Brigham consumption this week.
Yeah. So what happens is, Barbados white rum is very big, as it is in other islands, but in Barbados it's split between two brands. So that helps, whereas Old Brigham is very dominant in the aged rum.
What's the story of Dorley's exactly?
So Martin Dorley was a contemporary of my great-grandfather. He started his business in 1920. Same Robert Street, but at the end, Robert Street fed into Palmetto Street. He actually worked with a company well known to Barbadians, K. Shepherd, and K. Shepherd actually was a provision dealer at the time, and then he started out in the old K. Shepherd building in Palmetto Street in 1920, and he was very successful. He was more successful than my great-grandfather and my grandfather, and he built really quite a very respectable business. And then his company merged with Alinatha in about 70 or something like that. And while he was historically a very strong brand, I think number one brand in the 50s, by merging with Alinatha really got the preference. And long story short, Alinatha becomes part of what became the Plantation Group, was a local conglomerate. Long story short, that was in financial trouble, late 80s, early 90s. They were then looking to sell assets. And so they sold the brands. And that's where my father then bought them in 93. It created a little friction with us in Mount Gay because the boss of the company told Mount Gay, apparent to unknown to us, told Mount Gay yes, told us yes. And when it went to the board picked our offer. Mount Gay was on the impression that they had got it. And because, again, we're totally innocent. We had no idea. We just made our own offer and they accepted our own offer. Apparently, Mount Gay made a complicated offer. My father just said, here's cash. This is I'll write you the check. And that won the day.
There you go. Yeah.
So we basically acquired the Alinatha and Doherty's brands. And Doherty's being this wonderful history, very prestigious export brand. So when we made that decision that we were going to invest in the aged stocks, invest in an exporting a brand, we decided to do it on the Doherty's rather than on our own label. What was historically our own label. Just because they had the track record, and it just made more sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so Foursquare. Let's talk about its history first, because as you mentioned already, I think it was one of the sort of later surviving sugar factories.
So the site of Foursquare had been grinding cane since the 1600s. We can identify modern Foursquare from the early 1800s. It was a large single sugar estate. It became in the early 20th century an early central factory. So where the actual factory was separated from the sugar estate, and that separation exists to this day. We are Foursquare Distillery, which was the former Foursquare factory. We are surrounded by a company known as Foursquare Estate. So we bought that, and that central factory, whereas Foursquare Estate remained privately owned the entire time, Foursquare Factory is what went into that cooperative in 1970 as a sugar factory, and then was sold by that cooperative to us in 1994. Maybe concluded the deal in 95, but more or less 94. And then we took out all the old sugar factory equipment, refurbished it. We're making rum by September 96.
And there is some reference to a still house here as well. Yes. I mean, there would have been a still house, right?
So correct. In other words, rum was made everywhere it cane was crushed. It's the only question of how far you go back to find it.
Yeah.
So everywhere cane was crushed, that somebody made rum at some point.
Yeah.
So we know there were 150 odd distilleries about 1850s, and we know we know there was a shrinkage in 1780, or the loss in the American market. And then there's another big shrinkage from the 1850s on when they're bringing in licensing.
And sorry, just in the 1700s, there are around 400 or 500 mills in total. Would we assume that all of them were making rum?
Yeah, mid-18. Well, that's where the difficulty comes, because, of course, we know we lose a lot late 18, but probably around, so let's say at the peak before the American Revolution, it's of the magnitude of 500 all making rum.
And it's so interesting to sort of go around Barbados now and try and picture what 400 or 500 windmills would have.
Well, I did. So in my history of rum seminar, which I didn't do this BRE, I do put up, and it's so many that I can only put up a picture of St. Lucie and a picture of St. Philip. Because if I try to put up a picture of Barbados with a sort of pin of every windmill, you can't see anything on the map. It's buried. So to give people a better perspective, I've just put a picture of the number of mills in St. Lucie and the number of mills in St.
And Ligon's map has a bunch of
Yes.
plantations down the west coast, right?
Yes.
And it's the print
So
of,
they obviously start first on the coast.
yeah.
South and stuff, but you can get one of the best maps in Barbados is the one from 1825. It's absolutely fantastic, and that's the one where it shows Foursquare practically in its modern form. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's the one on the wall at St. Nicholas Abbey, I think.
You can see the roads that exist now
Yeah.
and the buildings that exist now. It's quite incredible.
Any ideas on the etymology of Foursquare? Is it four roads?
So that's a good question. We know that this area, as you can see, is a very flat area, and before agriculture and the digging of drainage wells, this would flood very easily, and so we have references to Square Pond, but we're not clear where the four comes from. It is reputed. One of the things the estates did in the days is to grow these lovely royal palms. And in order for you to spot how to get back from Bridgetown to the plantation would grow a number of royal palms in a particular configuration.
Right.
So it is reputed, but I'm not convinced on this story that Foursquare had four royal palms there at the end of the road. But anyway, yeah. So.
And it was one of the
But
first...
it's very early. In other words, this Foursquare took the name from the area.
Yeah.
So you have plantations today which took their name from owners, different things. This is one which has taken the area. So in the 18th century map of Barbados, this whole area is known as Foursquare. And then by the 19th century maps of Barbados, this is Foursquare Plantation in the parish of St. Philip.
When you built the distillery, that would have been the first new distillery on the island in how long?
So forgotten in our history, especially by the guys down the west coast, is there was another distillery built in 1934. So the column still comes in 1893. It's very successful. One of the brilliant moves of Mr. Ward is to put in a column still at Mount Gay. So yes, he's doing double distill, which is a big part of his survival. But probably the even bigger part of his survival is the genius to put in a column still. Barbados Rum Distillery is formed in 1934. And a big shareholder of that is another conglomerate, which is long gone, or long some soon, which is Barbados Shipping and Trading. That was one of the other big conglomerates on the island. And that comes in 1934, closes in about 71.
Right.
And so in the 50s, you have a scenario where we are down to 3 entities and all have column stills. Barbados Rum Distillery does not have a pot still. West Indies Distillery by now has adopted a pot still, which was controversial for them. Mr. Bancroft, who was kind of the lead shareholder there. So West Indies Rum Distillery was created by a man called George Tate, a man of very dubious reputation. And he went bust. And a group of elite Barbadian businessmen resurrected it, the lead of which was a Mr. Bancroft. Anyhow, long story short, Mr. Bancroft, Mr. John Lane, who is the manager there, campaigns to bring back in a pot still. Mr. Bancroft is dead against it, but eventually he wins out. So by that comes in, that's the Vulcan, and the trend at that time is pot stills with preheaters. This is considered very desirable, and so that's why you get this strange looking, not a chamber still, but a strange looking pot still. But anyhow, so that comes in. So by the 50s, Mr. Ward in St. Lucie has pot and column stills, pots, which he's had forever.
This is a man gay, just for anyone who's
Yes.
losing track here a little bit.
He
Yeah.
brought in the column still in the 20s. Word has both, Westina Rum Refinery, let's get the name right at the time, has pot and column stills, but they're obviously still about column still. But Barbados Rum Distillery has a column still.
West Indies Rum Distillery.
That shows you. So think 1890s, not a column still other than this other evidence that I found.
Yeah.
Not a column still. 1950s column still or you're dead.
Yeah, that is fascinating transition, isn't it? I don't know, maybe you've got some comments on West Indies Rum Distillery's very old claimed so-called Rockley still, which I forget what I forget what accreditation it's received, but oldest still in the world, something or other.
Absurd.
So
the whole Rockley still story is absurd. I'm sorry. I'm going to go this very quickly because I really don't want to talk about it. But effectively, what happened is West Indies, like all of us, would sell some bulk rum to Shear or Main Rum, their associated company, and technically Vellier was the first to bottle the 86 pot still, but the most one everybody knows is Bristol, and he put the word Rockley on it. I spoke with John Barrett. My best guess is Ben Cross, who was the proprietor at Main Rum. It was very common for those guys, if they sold a parcel rum, they didn't want to name the distillery, they gave it, and he mixed up Black Rock with Rockley. John Barrett also gives a story, which I think is that it was the parcel of rum was originally for Rockley Estate. But the long or short of it, whichever story, there was never anything called a Rockley still. Nobody ever heard of the Rockley still. John Barrett effectively created it by bottling a Bristol Barbados rum and writing the words Rockley still on it, much as he did. He's on his Trinidad stuff, he's written different names on. So there was never. And the 86 rum that was sold by West Indies to Main Rum was distilled in the exact same stills that they were there. There was no the same Vulcan, the same, those stills that were in the 80s are the exact ones that distilled it. There was never any legendary Rockley still. The name was invented in the UK. Anyone in Barbados would have been like. In fact, actually, when John Barrett released it at 12 years old, my father actually wrote him a letter and said, "This is very misleading. There's no Rockley still in Barbados." And he just played innocence, which is correct. He said, "Well, I bought this parcel of rum, and Ben Cross told me it was Rockley still." Which my suspicion means was he was just given just like today, some independent bottlers bottled St. Catherine's for Worthy Park. It was just, he mixed up Rockley and Black Rock.
I don't want to labour it, but do you think it's as old as it's been sort of made out to be, this still?
No. So when Bancroft resurrected Word with his funds, there was another distillery that started in Bay Street. And it only lasted a few months and was purchased by West Indies. So those elite business guys, they didn't mess around. And as far as I can tell, when Mr. Batson died in 1926, they bought his equipment so as to no one else would buy it.
Right.
And so one of the pieces of their apparatus, or maybe both, came from Batson, maybe one came from the other distillery they bought out. But no. I mean, show me the evidence. I mean, it's not for me to prove.
Sure.
It's for them to prove.
Yeah.
So show me the evidence.
Yeah.
And I would go back to this other, and this is the more important point for someone like me. A still is not the kettle. A still is a kettle, a head, and a condenser.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you find an old kettle and you tell me that kettle is a zillion years old, I don't give a shit. It means nothing. The rest of the still is the important bit. So you say, it's like, I don't know, finding the boot of a Ferrari and then building a new Ferrari around it and saying, well, I resurrected a Ferrari. And it's like, don't be ridiculous. So yeah, it's a kettle. And then you've guessed all the rest of it and built it brand new. Please, you have not resurrected anything. You've built a new still with one little piece of dubious provenance. That's it. Let's not talk about those.
No, we're going to move on.
Let's talk about good things.
Speaking about Ferraris, yesterday someone asked you, why did you buy your stills from Italy? And you said, have you ever driven a Ferrari?
Which is really not the best advert.
I do want to talk about your stills a little bit more, especially about the vacuum component of it as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when obviously we make this decision in '93, okay, we're going to build a distillery. And it's true, John Dory is very prevalent in the region. But John Dory is no more. That's another story. John Dory is no more. There's a new guy who's bought the name plate, but it's not John Dory. And I can remember I went here to an engineering firm, which was a firm that had a long history with the sugar industry, a very legendary firm. So obviously it was not, the firm itself was the shadow of what it was, but I went with one of the older gentlemen there, and I'm like, because I'm looking for advice, I'm looking for help. And I can remember, he's a great old school guy, lovely man. And he's like, don't the English make anything anymore? He's so upset that, John Doerr is gone, and, all of the English companies that built all these great mills and everything.
Yeah.
He's very upset that these are all gone. So anyhow, we end up approaching the Italians. And the Italians are spectacular because it's this old firm. But what they've done is they've invested in bringing in some of the best chemical engineers. And so they've got this old school beverage flair marrying with very clever engineers. And they've got me.
I guess it's both sides of the equation, isn't it?
Yes.
You can be a great engineer, but if you understand the chemistry,
it's not, there's one thing to be an engineer to build a big ethanol plant. There's another thing to be an engineer to build something that's a beverage. And this is what we found with the Italians, that nobody else married this engineering skill in this understanding that you're not making this specified product. You are making something that needs a bit of art and flair.
It's interesting it's Italy, because it's not a nation, and I'm going to offend some Italians here. Of course there are Italian distilled beverages, I acknowledge that, but it doesn't have the clout of somewhere like Germany with its eau de vies. It doesn't have the clout of France with its cognacs and brandies. And
no, it's true. They're more than well known with their bottling equipment and stuff like that. It's true, but they definitely have. And so my reference really with Ferrari is just it was really that marriage between sheer skill and flair.
Yeah,
in that way of expressing yourself, and I just, it was just, they tick the boxes.
Your stills operate under vacuum.
Yes.
Which is highly unusual.
In rum, yes. There's a few.
Yeah, there's a few. So there's an energy saving component to this.
Yes, absolutely.
And then what else? Does it?
So one of the things with molasses, particularly, it's very notorious for fouling of stills. So one of the immediate benefits is not the fouling, and it's something that got worse with the movement to vacuum pan molasses. I can remember, and this is not to knock these guys, the former boss of West Indies, a very good friend of mine, and lovely man, which I have a great relationship. I went down one day when they decided to resurrect the Blair still they had with bubble cap trays, and they're down there with hammer and chisel, because the bubble cap tray is like the worst possible tray for fouling.
Right.
Best is really great, but it's
Lots of surface area and,
Yeah.
and awkward to get at and everything, yeah.
and it's just a disaster with sort of modern day molasses. And so, yeah, fouling of that analyzer column in molasses,
And that's heat. So
yeah, the molasses is rich in all kinds of inorganic salts.
Yeah.
And give enough heat, they're gonna form and deposit on your stills.
So you do a vacuum and you lower the temperature.
I joke that the Caroni that people loved the best is when the stills were most
really dirty. Well, I mean, it stacks up because actually those Caronis have got that sort of
originally when
engine oil kind of.
When I looked at Caronis, I'd be picking out like the best, what I consider the best one. Caroni guys, no, they're the worst.
Yeah. You can tell the vintage based on how clean when the still was last properly cleaned, kind of thing. Yeah.
So one of the things a vacuum does, of course, is reduces, and I can honestly tell you, 30 years on, our analyzer column has never ever fouled.
Wow.
Yeah. So beyond efficiency, it's just the fouling. Of course, we have a better tray design than a good old-fashioned bubble cap. When I say better for fouling,
right?
Like we have bubble caps in the modern pot still has bubble caps. The brand newish one, but that's not molasses. That's vape. That's alcoholic vape. So don't let me ever knock the bubble cap. But never fouled. But the other thing is what we desire out of the mash, those volatile components, they don't take a lot of energy to get them out. There's a lot of energy needed to get that mash to boil. So if you can reduce that amount of energy, you can also reduce secondary reactions that you don't want. And so the beauty of the vacuum is giving you this very desirable spirit. And I think one of the things we sort of perceived at the time, which is accurate, is that people had moved a lot to very light spirits, because trying to make a not light spirit let in some of these undesirables, and so it was easier to kind of just let's just clean everything up, good and the bad. And so we were able to, with our column still, and this is why I make this joke, you'll have to prying the column still from my cold dead hands, because I love my column still spirit, and I love it because it's flavorful and it's sweet and it's rich and it has a nice mouthfeel. And I do believe we are able to deliver this because the vacuum gives us more tolerance. It gives us more, we are not producing the off flavors, so we can less aggressively separate, if you might say.
Yeah.
And I do think it's a big part of the success of the spirit.
What about from a kind of volatile quality point of view? Do you think that the vacuum in any way, I know obviously there's rectification going on here and there's retorts as well, but do you think the vacuum contributes in any way to capturing a different sort of cross-section of volatiles?
No, in fact, when we did the new pot still on the vacuum, this was going to be very interesting from the point of view that we were not putting in the second pot still to make something different. We wanted more of our pot still rum, and the various recipes that go in. But unlike the column still, we were going to have a control.
Yeah.
Going to have a control. And one of the fascinating things was, the best way I could describe it was that it tasted as if it was rested. So it was identical in a sense, but it was like it was the rested version of the old still. And I remember seeing that at the beginning and assuming that that was just an initial, and as we get going and it settles in and we recycle in the high one, that's going to change. And it didn't.
That didn't change. So just break apart what you would consider the difference between rested and unrested in the original still?
So it's just a little less sharp, on the nose.
Or resolved.
Yes, it's just that's my best way of describing it. It's like, okay, I made this fresh still. It's really nice and everything, but it's still a little sharp and it's a little aggressive.
I get you.
A little peppery. And all of a sudden, this guy comes off like it sat in the stainless steel for 3 months.
Interesting. Yeah.
And you do the analysis and everything's the same. But this guy's better.
Yeah. Probably just worth mentioning as well, you're not it's not operating out of a complete vacuum here, right? It's just lowering the air pressure. So the boiling points are lower. Yeah. Because we did, just for any confusion, this is not like zero.
No, not zero vacuum. No. So and we're not actually and this is a little bit my fault. I could try a little. The vacuum's actually a little not as low as the vacuum on the column still. Column still was really designed with the lower vacuum, and the thing about a column still is it works within its parameters. You don't want to mess with it. So like I could not run my column still without vacuum. It's designed to run in vacuum
because you couldn't create the energy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's designed all the sizing of everything.
So is the
pot still, in theory, we've never done it, but I could run my pot still atmospheric.
You could. So but is the air pressure it operates at basically just the sweet spot in terms of energy efficiency?
Yeah, well, what we did is we sort of went down a little bit, and we kind of got to a spot where I was super happy, and at that point we were just probably a little bit too excited and just needed, hey, we need to make rum. And I've been promising myself one day to experiment with some lower vacuums, but sometimes when you find what works, you just
I think
press on.
I think
I'm not obsessed with experiment. Well, I don't like experimentation at all.
Yeah,
I'm not obsessed. I'm happy. I move on.
Yeah, no. Well, actually, let's just focus on that for a second. Experimentation is a word that you're somewhat allergic to, right?
I hate that word. The only word I hate. Sorry, innovate. The only word I hate more than innovation is experimentation. I remember I have an importer in the US, and very lovely people, and one of the guys would go and say, ECS was my experiments, and every time he said it, I cringed. And I didn't want to sort of crush him and say it, and then eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I said, please stop saying experiments.
Experiment does sound a bit hit and hope, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how it's a question of how do you come and say, I represent the heritage of 400 years of Barbados rum making.
Here I am experimenting.
But I'm experimenting. For me, I just cannot say that. I cannot speak on two sides of my mouth. Either I'm proud of what I've been given, or I tell you I need to experiment and change things. So I can't. I hate that word. I am not experimenting. When I use a different cask, people, you're innovating using different. No, I am following the same basic principle. Good rum in a good cask. I've gone out to find a good cask. It's like when the guys asked me the other day, would I ever use an Armagnac cask? And I said, probably not. Got nothing against Armagnac. But I'm going out to find a good French oak cask that has had a distilled French brandy in it. The odds are it's going to come from cognac.
Yeah.
There's nothing prejudiced against Armagnac.
Yeah.
But I'm not searching for a cognac.
So you can write Armagnac on a bottle.
I'm searching for, so I end up buying because I really want great French oak. So, yeah, I'm not experimenting or I'm not innovating. I'm just following very basic principles, and I'm just trying to do them well.
Well, here's something that some people might misclassify as innovation that you are doing. You're now making cane juice rum. So let's talk a little bit about that, because it would seem
I'm making cane juice rum, my 400-year-old method.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's why it'd be a misclassification, because as we've already laboured the point, cane juice rum's been made on Barbados for 400 years.
So there's
350
another seminar I do called Back to Our Roots. And as I say, my wife doesn't let me do it. I could do about 6 seminars for BRE. But so one of the seminars I did is back to our roots. And the idea really is about that. It's about the fact that this modern separation of this, creating this version of rum industrial, if you like, this idea where the distillery is separated from the estate, it's very modern. And so the idea really is to, you ask me like why we do juice, and it's 3 reasons. One is to reblur those lines, reblur those old lines, because nobody talked about a molasses rum or a cane juice rum in the 19th century. And so we want to reblur those old lines. So again, yeah, it's not innovation. It's going back to our roots, and Foursquare was always this kind of anomaly in that we resurrected this old estate, but we were running it like rum industrial. It's an estate, but we're getting the molasses, even the local molasses. It's coming from off-site, and I want to restore that link. And it's not I don't see it as innovation. I see it as just restoring those normal links, which are natural. In other words, today we kind of forget that rum and whiskey and brandy are agricultural products. And I want to reinforce that again.
I mean, obviously, you're trying to make money here, but how much is historical authenticity a driving force of what you're doing at Foursquare?
Not historical authenticity for the sake of it. I mean, I gave you this story. I think I gave you. I can't remember. I remember visiting years ago a distillery in Kentucky, and they were like, "We're gonna," and they put pot stills in because they wanted resurrected pots. And then they put wooden fermenters in.
Well, I know which distillery this is, I think.
And I'm like, why? And then they said, we're going to clean them with steam. Like, why? So, yeah, there's history, but there's no need to be willfully oblivious.
Yeah. This is
So my partners at Turbag, they put in, sorry to mention, but they put in wooden fermenters, and I look at it and I go, why? I mean, you go to my cane juice fermentation, natural fermentation, 400-year-old method. It's in stainless steel. Why is it in stainless steel? Because I cannot be willfully stupid.
Yeah. So it's a historical, authentic lens. Yes. But in practice, you're going to use modern technology.
Exactly. Stainless steel is easy to clean.
Yeah.
I need clean. I have a modern understanding of biology. So I'm doing natural fermentation because it makes great rums. But it doesn't mean I'm going to be willfully ignorant of certain things.
Yeah. So you're doing natural
that's why I would say historical authenticity, but not for the sake of it.
Sure.
That's what makes you go and bellow wooden fermenter and I'm going to steam clean.
Not creating a crutch for yourself.
It's like, why?
Yeah. So spontaneous natural fermentation you're doing only with the cane juice.
Correct. Because cane juice, so one of the things when I was going to my yeast seminar, is cane juice is an indispensable component. So to do spontaneous fermentation with molasses alone, well, I wouldn't like to do it. And historically, we never did it. It was the juice is the indispensable component. I just happen to do 100% juice for the simple reason that I have loads of molasses in my attic, so I don't need spontaneous inspired molasses.
Yeah, so sorry, just on that, you said historically spontaneous on molasses were never done. Is that because there always would have been some juice mixed in?
Yes, in other words, but juice is that critical source of yeast.
Yeah, sure.
And because one of the things they would do as well is they would not only just add the skimmings directly, but they would add some cane materials, so some stalks of cane, things like this.
Yeah.
So cane is essential.
Yeah, got you.
Yeah.
And what does a natural fermentation bring to the party exactly?
Well, so again with my yeast seminar, it's so hilarious because I'm the mayor on the yeast, and people
Historically, you were the mayor on.
I'm the mayor on the yeast. I'm still the mayor on the yeast. Someone says to me, "Well, I've got my special strain of yeast." How exciting! I don't. In other words,
This was your position. This was your position a few years ago. That
well, I still. So I try to explain I'm schizophrenic.
Yeah, okay. You can occupy both positions.
If you talk to me in the south of the distillery, I talk about the virtues of the added piece. And if you talk to me in the north. But yes, in other words, I'm still meh on added yeast.
Got you. So you think when it comes to pitching yeast.
So in other words, you telling me I've selected my strain of yeast does not really excite me.
Do you think that
telling me you're doing natural fermentation with exciting. A dozen different species of yeast?
That's exciting.
Now I'm excited.
Yeah. By the way, and obviously you're a rum distiller. But you obviously drink other spirits and you have opinions on other spirits and you have a good amount of knowledge. Do you think that carries through to other spirits as well? If I tell you I'm using an interesting yeast to make my whiskey?
I honestly don't know. What I do know, I remember I had an intern here and he works in Scotch whiskey and he said to me something like, well, Scotch whiskey is the most diverse. And I went to him, any Scotch whiskey distiller is doing natural fermentation. Mm-hmm. And that sort of destroyed the argument immediately.
I mean, Scotch is a wonderful thing, and I love it. And I've spent a lot of time in Scotland, and I own a whiskey bar. It's not the most diverse spirit category, that's for sure.
Well, again, context. I actually think of Scotch whiskey as an incredibly diverse category, but that's because if I compare it, say, to bourbon.
Yeah, well, that's true. Bourbon, and this legal parameters, of course, have constricted bourbon to be a very specific thing. Yeah.
Do I think it's as diverse as rum?
No. And it's not as diverse as agave spirits, for sure, either.
I'm really very weak on my agave spirits.
Yeah, take my word for it. It's not. Okay, so you alluded to already the multiple different yeasts and bacteria.
So when I'm in the north of the distillery, Mother Nature and yeast are king. They rule the world. And my job is to herd it in the direction I want. And there are wonderful techniques that we have, born of 20 years of experience or 30 years of experience of fermentation, but they're heuristics. They are methods of cajoling, persuading, nudging. There is nothing like the control. As I said, when I started out natural fermentation, I had this belief that I knew something about fermentation, that I had some level of expertise because I had been 20 years adding yeast to molasses fermentation. Well, I was in for a humbling.
Yeah.
And I realized these yeasts are not so easy. But it has been very rewarding. And you really I grew up with the words of vintage and terroir, and we understand those words. When I did natural fermentation, those words had a new level of meaning. I really understood what those words meant. Yeah.
What's going on in a natural fermentation that's different to a pitched yeast fermentation?
Well, you're at the mercy. You don't control the levels, so we see it races on first with Saccharomyces type yeasts, typically cerevisiae, and then thankfully in comes Bombay, because if Bombay didn't come in, because what's happening at the same time is the bacteria is rolling along and it's making acids and your acidity is rising. And if you were doing an added yeast fermentation, you would be like, oh my God, I got an infection. And sure enough, your fermentation would come to a grinding halt. But it doesn't in natural fermentation because S. Bombay makes its appearance. And it starts to multiply and it starts to work in this very acid environment. And you then end up with this kind of almost gravity defying, where you have a decent yield of alcohol, but you have this amazing pungent flavor. And wonderful thing too about it is it's very heuristic. a great smelling fermentation makes a great smelling rum.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you have these heuristics which are common sense, and they make, they work. I mean, when you walk in that room and that smell in there is just...
Yeah, and of course that smell is the volatiles evaporating off the fermenter, and the same process is going to take place in those stills, right? And then you get to select those volatiles.
But it's fun and it's learning. I mean, as I say, you can have a ferment and it races along, and you're measuring alcohol in a conventional way, and all of a sudden you think you're dead, and the Brix is still high, so you think, oh my God, it's dead.
And then something else kicks in.
Then S. Bombay comes to your rescue.
Yeah, so S. Bombay is another species of yeast that prefers this acidic environment, and sort of it comes in as a fermentation.
So it will correct. It cannot compete with the Saccharomyces type yeast. It works very slowly, and so it really only rears its head much later in the very acidic conditions. And you want that acidity, so you need that acidity, because that acidity is going to give you the ester development. So you need all these things. So you need your Saccharomyces to run into trouble, because you want the acidity, and then you get the S. Bombay, and the S. Bombay basically gives you that trade-off. It gives you some more alcohol, but it continues to work really slowly, so you get the flavor development, the ester formation. And then when you finish, you smell this thing, and it's just incredible. And you put it through the stills, and the rum that comes off then is, and not off the chart. Like we've done some where we got silly ester numbers, and we kind of realized that's not the way to go. So we typically, we've done ones that went 1,500 or more esters.
Oh, really?
No, and then we realized that's not the way to go. And we get the most beautiful rums, about 500-600 esters.
Still fairly high though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I always think yeasts, they're often called cultures, and it's so beautifully named, because they have their own preferences, sensibilities, ways about them, tolerances, ways in which they interact. And so when you think about a fermentation, I guess like the analogy would be pitching yeast is like dropping a nuclear bomb. Whereas natural is like a war zone,
This very strain, it's very, very efficient. But as I said, I like to give the flip side of the story. Imagine your natural fermentation, and the yeast salesman comes around. He's your hero.
Yeah.
He comes and he says, well, you know what? You're going to get it in 2 days.
We're going to do it so fast and so consistently.
You're going to get a better yield. You're going to get it consistently. You're going to get the same flavor every time. He's wonderful. So it's funny how in life we're obsessed now with something from the past, but the past guy thought the yeast guy was he was.
Well, I think a lot of it's this like sort of post World War II period where there was this movement towards standardization, homogenization, consolidation, and with distilling or even brewing, I guess, and winemaking, yeast was exactly that. It was a facet of that. It's like, I need control. I need the same thing over and over and over
again. As the brewers come to me, and I was explaining, I said, you guys like total control. Yes, we have to be in control. And I said, over here we have no control. It's totally antithetical to their way of operating.
Yeah. So what is going on with this cane juice rum? Because I know when I heard you were doing it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Foursquare are going to start releasing rum agricole, and that's not the plan at all. No. So what is the plan?
So of course, one of the frustrations for someone like me is when people equate sugarcane juice with agricole. It's well needed.
Yeah, for those
and I know why.
For those listening, I did do air quotes rum agricole.
I know why it happens, because for a long time the only rums from fresh cane juice were agricole, so I can understand why we've got ourselves into this problem. It's I have lots of rum agricole friends, so I'm very sympathetic to them. But they are it's a little bit their fault as well, because they haven't done a good
Yeah,
job
yeah,
to
yeah, it's true.
explain. Yes, they're part of why people get it wrong.
They need the education. Yeah, yeah.
So yes, I mean, obviously, when I mention the word cane juice, people, how are you going to make rum alcohol? No. As I say, my mission, when we brought out the cane juice, we had 3 objectives: reblur the lines, I'm going to forget them again.
Planting cane.
Making sure Barbados did not stop planting cane. So there's always been a fear of the last years that one day the government's going to say, I'm not subsidizing the sugar industry anymore, and there's going to be no more cane. So that was the other reason. And then the third reason is to restore the link between Foursquare and its immediate environment. Because as they say, Foursquare, to our credit, we didn't go and build a greenfield distillery, but we have to finish that process by restoring that link. And that was my seminar, Returning to Our Roots, was about that. So it was about Mount Gay returning to their roots. So in 2015, they bought the estate. They then built the sugar factory. Larry and Nicholas from day one was like, I'm not getting in this molasses game. I'm going to grow my own cane. And us, and with Larry, it was very interesting. Larry, I helped Larry out when he got started with supply of rum. He helped me out years later by supplying me juice, giving me some early experience with juice before I crushed. And yeah, so it's about restoring that link so that the rums of Foursquare have a link to the Foursquare environment.
Yeah, and you've ended up in a very unique situation. There's very few distilleries that are doing both cane juice and molasses under one roof.
Getting increased in Worthy Park, who obviously have
Sure.
the ability,
Sure.
have done a really, very impressive cane juice rum. And my guess is, I don't want to preempt my friends of a Mount Game, but my guess is they'll eventually use that factory for different things. Right now, obviously, they're focused on the molasses. Fair enough. They've just started it. But I could see in the future them.
Would you be happy to see Barbados emerge in the future as a style that celebrates all of these different cane derivatives?
Yes. I mean, I love the fact that the 3 of us who grow cane do 3 different things with it. I love that. I think that's just brilliant. And yet everything we produce is recognizably Barbados. I love that my Jamaican colleagues, 4 distilleries, and they're all different. But taste any one individually and you go, Jamaica. This is the gold. This is the, if you want to have this really strong geographical link of what you do in this sense of place, that's what you want. You want someone who drinks a Worthy Park and go, oh, hey, Jamaican. You want someone who drinks a Foursquare or a Nicholas Abbey and go, oh, Barbados.
So what is Barbados style then?
So growing up, I've always thought Barbados style is very balanced, very rounded, very seductive, very, that sort of, obviously we're biased. So that kind of perfect compromise. Our Jamaican friends are too intense. We're the more balanced one. This is our bias.
Of course.
But yes, in other words, I always feel that a Barbados rum should have this kind of sort of seductiveness, this kind of, you should pour it and take a little time with it. It shouldn't scream what it is. It's like Barbados itself. We are the, in the region, we're known to be very friendly, laid back.
Yeah, I like that.
We're not quite as manic partiers as the Trinidadians.
Yeah.
We're not as...
I love that. I mean, when you're talking about sense of place,
yeah,
that's a wonderful thing where the spirit reflects the culture.
Yeah, and I think it very much does. I mean, that, the wonderful thing about rum is it has this diversity. And the great mistake is to believe this diversity has something to do with, the distiller's creativity. It has nothing to do with that. It's all about the culture.
Yeah.
It's all about economic adaptation to changes. In other words, it's a much more sophisticated story.
Yeah. And
I mean,
and also economic adaptation, but it also filters into that is taxation has always
Yeah.
been a huge
Yeah.
like a lever in terms of the way people make products. And then, and I bang on about this all the time on this podcast, but cultural sensibility. What do these people eat? How do they behave in
Yeah.
public? All of those things
well,
factor in.
when I went and had a wonderful visit at Don Q, and we tasted some 100%,
Aguardente.
old. And it was fantastic.
Mm.
So we're going there with the sort of chief technical person.
Are they bottling any of that, or is it all getting?
No, well, that's it. So we're talking with Sylvia, and Sylvia is someone I known of a long time. I met her sort of years ago, and she's one of these very, very sharp people in the industry. And of course, we're bringing our culture. So we're like, why don't you bottle this? No. And we're like, why don't you do it at cask strength? No. Their culture is different. They want something very elegant.
Yeah.
Very soft.
Exactly, yeah.
So us idiots there clamoring over this pure.
Yeah.
I mean,
You just don't know the culture. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's very important.
And it's very interesting, and it should be part of the tapestry of rum in the
Exactly.
Caribbean,
And
it's what enriches the whole thing.
So they hate as much as me when you have the kind of sugar ducked up Spanish rum, because they are authentic Spanish style rum makers.
Yeah.
And it's this light and very elegant, and it's a different style, and they're very good at their style.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so on Barbados then, geographical indication. How important is this to Barbados?
Well, I think people don't. The problem is every time we talk about geographical indication within the spirits journalist world, we get obsessed with all the wrong things, because as soon as you flag that, journalists want to talk about rules and what's allowed and not allowed, and they lose sight that this is a legal process. This is a very dry legal WTO action, and it's about making sure something that they took for granted, which is that the bottle of Barbados rum actually came from Barbados. And the best way for me to sometimes illustrate it is to give the counter example. So the Japanese whiskey that was distilled in Canada, or the Colombian rum that was distilled wherever, because it was illegal to make rum in Colombia for many years. And people don't understand that the thing about the EU is that it's this fantastically protective of geographical indications. But the flip side of that is that any other word is just marketing. I can remember a few years ago, there's a certain brand of rum that sells in the EU, and it says it's Dominican Republic, and it doesn't come from the two distilleries in the Dominican Republic. And they sort of appeal to the authorities, and the authority says, well, where is your GI?
Yeah.
No GI.
Do whatever you like.
There's no, because the origin statement, where they did the certificate of origin, gets you past the border. So if I ship a tanker of Barbados rum, and I want it to go in duty free into the EU under the EPA, our European Partnership Agreement, as long as I meet those rules, it goes in. But once it's inside the EU, it's a product. I can blend it, I can mix it, I can do whatever I want. And Barbados is not protected, so I can mix it with some other rums, and I could say Barbados. And even worse than that is because I have value-added accumulation rules under my free trade agreement with the EU. I could import some Guatemalan rum, blend it right here in Barbados, As long as I meet the rules of the EPA, I can ship it with a CARICOM certificate of origin. So one of the things, and we have been led down this trail of discussing rules, and it's a bit of a mistake. We need to get back to first principles for people to understand, why do you want a GI? GI is about basic protection, about basic understanding. Because GIs are really not a lot about rules. It's easy to blur GIs with PDOs, which are very specific. So
similar to a GI, but just much more legal kind of framework around
Scotch
it.
whiskey is a PGI.
Yeah.
There's not a lot in there about methods. Oh my God, you got peated whiskey, non-peated whiskey, triple distill, double distill.
Yeah, more about character.
Column distill.
Yeah.
It's more about how you label with it. Yeah. But if you think of the world of Scotch whiskey, there's not a lot of restriction. But now when you talk about a PDO, cognac, Martinique rum, you're talking very specific ways of making it. So PDO and PDI, not to be confused. But those who wouldn't like us to have a GI like to blur those lines.
What?
And then the other way, there's a couple of ways that they blur this thing, which is really unfortunate.
Wait, before you get there, can you just state clearly what the GI would say?
So correct. So in other words, GI is about where it's made. So a Barbados Rum GI says it's made in Barbados pot and column stills, because that's what we do. A GI doesn't define, a GI describes. So let me describe Barbados Rum. It's made in Barbados in pot and column stills. It's fermented, distilled, and aged in Barbados, and bottled in Barbados. That's it. It doesn't tell you the methods. It doesn't tell me how to do my fermentations. Now, imagine that in St. Philip, I created a very specific style of rum. I might go register a PDO for St. Philip rum, and it might have very specific methods. This PDO, different thing. The GI is to protect me from that dilution, that potential dilution. You know, this comes from Barbados. And it has to have much maturation, because maturation is important. The one that is more the debate that you don't always see is the packaging. So I remember speaking with Alan Park about the Scotch Whisky Association, and he told me, he said, you know, at the time we did the GI, there was a lot of blended whiskey bottled outside, so we didn't fight that. He said, but there was very little single malt bottled outside, so we insisted.
And they knock it.
And so we've always taken the approach. So you know, Demerara has done a two-tiered bottling, and I'm always open to two-tiered bottling.
Two-tier, yes, you mean it
as
doesn't
in,
have
like
to be
the lower, exactly,
Yeah.
like a lower end product. But you want to have your higher end stuff.
Why would someone?
Because bottling is not. It's harder to argue that bottling is a geographical fluid.
It's just been put in a bottle. Yeah, I get that. So, why would someone? And let's be clear here, and I'll be clear, and you don't want you don't want to say any more than you need to. We've got West Indies Rum Distillery here. They are pushing back on this GI.
Yes.
Why? What's their reason? Why would?
Well, I can tell you from the beginning they were against the GI. So they met with us. We had a Barbados Rum committee meeting back in shortly after their purchase, and they were absolutely, the government at the time was purchasing for the GI, which again, one of the blurrings that happens is the idea that the GI is some kind of national. It's unfortunate because our islands are small. So I export something that's known as Barbados Rum. But the GI is not a national endeavor. Any individual producer can register.
It doesn't belong to the nation.
No. It's not. It's just, unfortunately, or fortunately, we trade as Barbados Rum. So we have to use the national name. But yes, no, I can tell you absolutely, and the other three will back me up, they pressed against it, full stop. And then they changed tactic, instead of said, no, okay, we said, well, we want a GI, but we want this kind of, this this inclusive GI, but of course it's nonsensical. I mean, either the product is from somewhere.
What's the terms of the inclusivity from their point of view?
Well, so one of the things that happened is, and this is what really turned everybody, because in the beginning I sort of warned against that angle, and I think Larry and Raphael were thought I was being a bit harsh, but basically they attacked everything, and this is what we see. So we thought something as trivial as you ferment Barbados rum and Barbados water was absolutely non-debatable, not controversial. And then no, we can't have that. We want to use seawater. So every single element.
Oh yes,
as I summarize, left to them.
Does Barbados seawater not count as Barbados water?
No. Left to them, Barbados rum or Jamaica rum need not be made with local sugar cane, need not be matured in the island, need not even be matured in a cask, because they were like, oh, we want to mature in a vat.
You think their driving force is purely economic?
Yes. Yeah.
But they might say that they might say, and I'm not putting words in their mouth, that there's creative freedom, for example.
Yeah, but so a couple of things that they have been successful with is this notion that Barbados or Jamaica GI is some kind of national endeavor. It's not. It's got nothing to do. It just happened here in Barbados that a government agency promoted it, but it's not a decision of government. It's got nothing to do with government. In Jamaica, the government's not involved at all. The second thing that they have been sort of successful in doing is this notion that a GI somehow links to the past. And so therefore, if I dig up and I find some activity from the past, it must be in a GI. This, of course, is absolutely ridiculous. And they peddle this in Jamaica.
So rationalizing anything.
Yes. Yeah. And so in Jamaica, you see NRJ peddle this, which is false. This notion that, well, Jamaica rum was always matured in the UK, so therefore we must include it in GI. And this notion that if something happened in the past, it's part of a GI is I mean, this is not in the act. This. And if we think of Scotch whiskey, my God, imagine every nefarious activity that happened in Scotch whiskey, being compelled to be in the. Yes, it would be hilarious. And so this notion is ridiculous. So the basis of this argument, but of course, it's so wrong in Jamaica. That this idea that there was a tradition to age rum in Jamaica, as I demonstrated, is completely false. And what is even worse is that the two rums that today that are shipped in bulk, and this is the real tragedy. This tells us our GI is too late. Is Captain Morgan and Myers, both of whom were born in Jamaica and originally 100% aged and bottled in Jamaica. And so now they are literally coming and saying to you, they introduced aging outside and saying, but you now have to respect this tradition that I've created. It's like the guy selling the fake Rolex on the corner saying, well, I've been doing it for 20 years. So you, Rolex, must respect me and let me keep selling my fake Rolexes.
It's a good analogy, that one. I like it. Okay. What's your prognosis for this GI situation? Do you see it happening, or is there too much resistance there? And
So there's a level of resistance that the law never anticipated. So if you look at Jamaica, so the GI Acts, which are exactly the same in all the members of the WTO, it says any producer can register GI, gets published, anybody can object, anybody connect it. And we went through that period in Jamaica. It's done. GI is registered. They have now gone to court and said, I want an injunction to stop you from registering this elsewhere. But that breaks the original legislation.
Mm.
The original legislation said, okay, here's a period. Here's your objection period. So if we, and the trouble is that all these legislation is new. So if we create a scenario where the legislation can't work as intended, which is, here's the objection period, it's finished, you can come after the objection period. So I don't think the High Court in Jamaica really understands fully the concept.
It sets a precedent for
the dangerous thing they've done.
What about the Barbados GI though?
Our problem is we haven't even got as far as registration.
Sure.
So we know that if we get it registered, or when they will have the objection process. The problem is you can't object to a GI, Barbados Rum GI, and say, I object because I want to make my Barbados Rum in France.
Yeah.
So we know that part.
But the three distilleries that are on board with the GI, you can register it. This is gonna.
So the troubling thing for us observing Jamaica is that, let's say we succeed tomorrow in registering it, we know they're going to run to court to stop what us falling 100% in the act. And then they may not succeed. They succeed because, one of the things they're doing in Jamaica, one of the other things that are successful in doing is creating this notion that, again, if you feel that the GI is defining, and we see these headlines all the time, and I was very frustrated with the headlines recently, and I told some of the spirit journalists that wrote me, I said, if this was happening in Scotland, if some lunatic Jamaican had written the SWA and said, I'm taking you to court because I want to age my Scotch whiskey in the Blue Mountains of Jamaica, you would not write a headline, dispute over Scotch whiskey definition. You wouldn't.
No.
You would write lunatic from Jamaica is, doing foolishness. So this is one of the challenges.
It's being spun in a particular way to grab attention.
But one of the ways they've spun this GI is like it's a piece of legislation. And so the idea is that if we want to protect this, we want to protect this product. That doesn't stop anything else. But they've been able to frame it that if I protect Barbados Rum or Jamaica Rum, I'm going to, NRJ is always in the paper, I'm going to lose jobs. This is nonsense. This is nonsense. All you have to do is make sure that your product can't be confused with a protected product.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
But they have been able to convince people in the court that there's going to be some kind of economic catastrophe. And this is absurd. I mean, the idea that you could have a legislation in a country, intellectual property registration, and you're going to run down and register something. And so, what are they going to do? We're going to have police run down. I mean, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And of course, we know from Scotch whiskey, there is bulk whiskey that goes to Europe and is sold in Spain and sold in France. And they write distilled in Scotland. Product of France, product of Spain. As long as you cannot mistake that product for Scotch whiskey, you are not breaking any. In other words, do not infringe on someone's intellectual property.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
So let's say you file tomorrow, and obviously they appeal, because they're going to appeal. One would think 3 against 1.
So they will appeal, but they will lose because, as they say, you can't appeal a registration on the basis that I want to make my product.
So what's the problem here exactly? Why can't you?
So then, following Jamaica, we would imagine that FRGI got registered. Because remember, in Jamaica, it's registered.
Yeah.
Registered since 2016. We imagine they will follow the same playbook and say, okay, I want to stop you. I'm going to get the court to assist me in stopping you from registering the European Union, which of course is, that's our first port of call.
Yeah, yeah.
It's and it's wrong. It's wrong. We want to protect this product, and this product is made in Barbados from right through to bottle. You have this vision, you want to age some Barbados distillate somewhere, off you go. As long as the consumer can't mistake this for our protected baby, then there's no issue. It's exactly analogous to a trademark.
Yeah.
As long as you don't infringe on my trademark, it's no issue.
How important is transparency in rum? We were talking about transparency yesterday as well, by the way, weren't we? But
So I unfortunately have this reputation for transparency. And it came about for very good reasons. I mean, it came about because I would call out some of the shenanigans in rum. But I hate the notion of being transparent. Because the thing about our industry is that the reason we love it so is because it's the mystery behind it. We're not buying widgets. We are buying something with a bit of art and craft and skill and mystery and secrecy. And so as much as I admire those guys in Taiwan with their beautiful label of every single thing, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to make a product with a technical specification sheet. As much as my 4 lines has become a technical specification sheet. No, I believe labeling is very important. I believe labeling should serve a couple of very important purposes. The first one, of course, is identifying the product. So rum. So in other words, I'm very happy to sell you some kind of sweetened flavored product, but I'm going to tell you that it's a liqueur or a spice rum or whatever. I have nothing against those products, but I'm not going to label them as rum. So the first thing is identity. The second thing is to help you evaluate the price. So this is why age statements have become important to me, and writing things like single blended, so you know this pot still. I want to help you understand the price and the label. If something's cheap, I don't give a shit what age it is. If it's cheap, it's cheap. But and then the third thing is really for your enhancement. So this is why I write Madeira Cask or Cognac Cask.
Yeah.
I want to help you enjoy the product. Do I want a laundry list of specifications? Absolutely not. Am I going to tell you the percentage of pot or molasses or cane? Not a chance. Not get that out of me. That's the mystery.
And it's not even, I suppose, that you couldn't or wouldn't divulge it. It's more that you're actually taking something away from the consumer by giving them all the information.
Yeah, I don't want to reduce it to numbers. I mean, we had Luca, when he did the habitation value range, would put the Ester count. And we didn't put it. I put it with LFT. It was a different reason. And then LFT2, I didn't. Because I don't want a number on my body.
Yeah.
Luca is like, because the habitation value range, he wants to educate. So his motivation is very pure as to why he wants to put that number. But I don't want to put the number because I don't want my rum reduced to a number. I want mystery.
What would you, if you had godlike control over European and American legislation, what would you stipulate that rum producers need to put on a bottle?
Well, I think for sure I would distinguish between rum and sweetened rum. As they say, I have nothing against liqueurs.
But just say what it is. Yeah.
I make, we make Falernum, but I make Charisma rum cream.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
I have nothing against anyone who has a sweet tooth.
Yeah.
But don't sell me a rum liqueur for a rum.
Don't pretend something is something that it isn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned Luca. And when I had Luca on the podcast, I asked him to talk about you. And I think he referred to you as his wife.
Yes, I remember that.
So now it's your turn to reply. What does Luca mean to you, and what do you think he means to Rob?
Yeah. So what happened was is Luca had a wonderful relationship with Isu Prasad, Demerara Distillers. So that allowed him, because the key, Luca didn't want to go to the the stockists in Europe where Demerara had supply didn't want to go to the main rum, and those guys didn't buy a partially aged. So he'd go to Isu, and Isu would sell him a cask direct. And when Isu retired, he kind of lost that relationship. And so he came to me with a dual mission, actually. He came to me because he wanted to continue sort of Demerara style bottlings, either blends or pastel, that he could, source 100% aged in the distillery. And he also was on this mission to, talk about the pot still. Because as we've talked about, there's not a lot of spirits made in a pot still in the grand scheme of things.
Nope.
It's very special. And the tragedy in rum is that it's kind of almost like hidden. In whiskey, at least, single malt's its own category. In rum, you could see a bottle of a Hamden next to a bottle of Bacardi under the white rum section.
No idea. Yeah.
No disrespect to my friends at Bacardi, but these are two different products.
Yeah.
And so he really came to me as a pot still producer.
What was the first meet? I mean, were you already selling rum to Velier before?
No, I think Luca came to me about 2015, maybe 2014.
You knew who he was by reputation?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
I knew of him, but I hadn't really met him personally. Daniele, that worked for him, was involved with, had done some work for Wurspa, and I knew Daniele. And I think Daniele was who sort of said, Luca, you need to, which I then repaid a few years later because I was the one that introduced Luca to Hamden. So I was like, Luca, you have to meet, because he came to me and talked about pot stills, and I was like, Luca, you have to meet the Huzzy family.
Yeah.
Let me introduce you to them, and that relationship.
Daniele is really one of Luca's highly effective right-hand men.
Yes.
I know that he got him over to Haiti as well.
Yes.
So he's got a lot to answer for.
Yes. So yes, I set up that first meeting with Hamden, and it was so funny. And then he went out to Hamden, and then he came back, and then he said, I'm going back to Hamden, and I have to come with him. So we went to Hamden together. So that was one of those trips that are, you don't really know it at the time, but it's a seminal trip.
Yeah.
And from that is born the whole relationship of Valier and Hamden, and the born of Veritas and everything. So yeah, wonderful trip. But yeah, no, Luca came to see me. He lost Demerara. He was looking, as he said, for a new wife. He lost Isu.
And how's your marriage been?
Very good. Very good. Very good. I mean, the thing about Luca is he's doing so many things, getting excited about a project. So now we're kind of almost like an autopilot.
Yeah, sure.
And he's running off doing his, the latest one with his moving of the stills, and he's running. He's doing
the nomad thing.
So Luca and I are like, we just take over now. Let's bottling comes up. I send him a sample, and he's like, yeah, I love it. Bottle it, and off we go. Yeah, it just takes over. And of course, he has good people working on it.
His impact on the world of rum,
I think, fantastic. It's kind of ironic through Caroni, this very divisive product, but we have to give Caroni a lot of credit because it showed people there was a different world of rum. And it was very old. Let's be careful. Let's be honest. My challenges with a product like Caroni is that it's not the greatest distilled, but you cannot beat aging. Aging I describe aging as the most powerful tool we have to improve a spirit. And so when you drink in these old Caronis and they're good, they're good because of their age. They're not good because of their fermentation or their distillation. They're good because of the time. And you can't underestimate Luca's influence.
Foursquare is already regarded by many people as the best rum distiller in the world. Where and we've discussed a lot of the changes that have happened here over the last 30 years, from the building of the distillery through to introduction of cane juice, the innovations. Oh, not innovations, sorry. Technological installations of stills and so on and so forth. Where do you see it being in the next 20, 25 years? What?
So I'll just correct you. There's no best distillery. There's no best distillery to everyone. There's only a best distillery to everyone.
As I say,
Every individual.
regarded by many, although I say many, I mean, you have a extremely loyal, obviously with Dawley's, it's a broader fan base, but with your exceptional cast series, it's a much smaller fan base, but it's a very passionate fan base.
And it's something we love. We it's blown us away to have the fans and the people who love it and the collect and it's a broad. What I mean is people, some of the Foursquare fans drink lots of different rums. Some of them are just Foursquare. I mean, it's very, and that's fine. I mean, that's exactly what we want. So no, I mean, all you can do is you put yourself out there, and all you can do is hope that some people love you. And yeah, I mean, we're very happy, obviously, with the reputation of Foursquare. I mean, but it's, as far as best distillery, it really depends on your style. I mean, if you're agricole lover, you're going to choose a different distillery. If you're
until you release 100% cane juice.
So. Yeah, if you're a Jamaican rum lover, you're going to pick a different distillery. If you're a Barbados rum lover, well, I have a good shot at being picked. But yeah, I mean, and that's the wonderful thing. I mean,
but Richard, I don't think it's just about what style of rum that you like. It's respect for the attention to detail in the production.
Exactly. No, there's no question about that. And I mean, I have a wonderful relationship with the people at Hamden. I have a wonderful relationship with Gregory and Nissan, and there's a kind of a sort of a mutual respect and admiration. And we know we don't directly compete because we do different things.
Yeah.
And that what makes it really very.
And also, to be honest with you, the rums of Nason and Hampton and Foursquare, especially with the exceptional cast stuff, they're all going to be stocked in the same bars.
Yes, but they're very different.
They're very different,
and we know.
But if you are a specialist rum bar, you've got all three of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to achieve. Yeah. That's what we The mission is not, I want to be number one. The mission is, that's a great rum bar. I want to be in that rum bar. That's the mission. I want to be next to Gregory's Nissan. I want to be next to the Hamden.
But how much of it is about what you personally want Foursquare to be, and how much of it is about actually the rum category and making sure that people...
Yeah, so my obsession has always been to enter that whiskey audience. Mm-hmm. My mission has never been about the rum audience. So as much as, we produce, I couldn't care less about shall we mention any brands, the Kappa drink or I mean, if they switch over to me, that's great, but they're not what I'm after. I'm after the single malt guy. I want to show him and say, hang on a minute. There's a world out here you may not know about. Yeah, that's who I'm after. Yeah.
So yeah,
which again is why we have the relationship with Hamden and Nissan, because we're all kind of on the same mission. Yeah. Our mission is not to cannibalize each other. Our mission is to come after the whiskey guy and the brandy guy.
So yeah, in 20 years, this distillery, how will it look different to the way it is now, and where would you hope that the brand and rum will...
Well, yeah, again, I hope just the rum category grows, particularly one of the things about the weaknesses in rum is not so much the rum's volume, because of course we have stupid volumes with Bacardi and Catamari. Where we have an embarrassing volume is the share of the super premium. And that's what we want to change. And we're only little, so we're not going to do it on our own. But if in a few years' time, the share of the super premium is much bigger for rum, we will benefit from that. But it won't be because of us. We're just too small. But we want to be piece of that. Yeah.
Richard Seale, thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
That was fun.
Good.
Nearly 3 hours.
Hopefully our audience will enjoy it.